Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about the Wind River Range until what happened to me out there. My name is Marcus Stone. I'm 29 years old, and what I lived through during that week still wakes me up at night. It was supposed to be a simple guy's trip. Jake Morrison and I had been working at the same engineering firm for 3 years, grinding through 60-hour weeks designing municipal water systems for towns across the Midwest. We were both burned out, both recently single, both desperately needing to get away from spreadsheets and client meetings and the soul-crushing routine of suburban professional life. Wyoming, Jake had announced one Friday afternoon, dropping a stack of wilderness magazines on my desk. Remote camping, no cell service, no internet, no people. Just us, nature, and enough beer to forget our troubles. I'd been skeptical at first. Jake was more of a city guy than an outdoorsman, more comfortable in a sports bar than around a campfire. But the idea was appealing. We could rent an RV, drive out to some remote corner of Wyoming, and spend a week fishing and hiking and pretending we were rugged outdoorsmen instead of desk jockeys. The Wind River Range, Jake had said, pointing to a map spread across his desk. 21 million acres of wilderness. We could disappear out there for months and no one would find us. That should have been our first warning. We rented a modest Class C RV from a dealer in Denver, a 24-footer with a small kitchen, dinette, and bunk beds that reminded me of summer camp. The owner, a grizzled ex-military type named Carl Peterson, had given us a lengthy lecture about wilderness safety. "You boys ever been camping in the high country before?" he'd asked, studying our soft office worker hands and pale complexions. "We're not complete greenhorns," Jake had said with false confidence. "We've both been camping." Carl had snorted. "Car camping at state parks don't count, son. The Wind Rivers are serious wilderness. Weather can change in minutes. Temperatures drop 40 degrees after sunset. And if you get lost..." He'd shaken his head. "Let's just say search and rescue don't find everyone." He'd insisted on loading us down with extra supplies. Emergency flares, a satellite communicator, extra water containers, and a detailed topographical map of the region. "Stick to the established campgrounds," he'd warned. "Don't go wandering off into the backcountry thinking you're Lewis and Clark. And if you hear voices calling for help at night..." He'd paused, studying our faces carefully. "Well, just remember that sound carries funny in the mountains. Sometimes what you think you're hearing ain't what's really there." Jake and I had exchanged glances, both of us thinking the old man was being overly dramatic. But something in his tone had made me pay attention, the same way I'd learned to listen when construction foremen talked about dangerous job sites. The drive to Wyoming was everything we'd hoped for. We left Denver on a Monday morning in early October, taking our time and stopping at every roadside attraction that caught our fancy. Jake documented everything with his expensive camera, claiming he was going to start a travel blog when we got back. "Look at this country," he'd said as we drove through the endless grasslands of eastern Wyoming. "Makes you feel small, doesn't it?" He was right. After years of living in cramped apartments and working in windowless offices, the vast scale of the western landscape was both exhilarating and unsettling. The sky seemed impossibly huge, stretching from horizon to horizon without a single tree or building to break up the emptiness. We reached the Wind River Range on Tuesday afternoon, following increasingly narrow dirt roads into the heart of the wilderness. The landscape gradually changed from prairie grassland to rolling hills covered in sagebrush, then to steep-sided valleys crowned with snow-capped peaks that rose like cathedral spires into the thin mountain air. "Jesus," Jake breathed as we crested a ridge and got our first full view of the range. "It's like another planet." The mountains were beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Granite peaks thrust upward like broken teeth, their faces scarred by ancient glaciers and painted in shades of gray and rust red. Below the peaks, alpine meadows stretched like green carpets, dotted with pristine lakes that reflected the sky like mirrors. But there was something unsettling about the vast scale of it all. We were 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by millions of acres of empty wilderness. If something went wrong out here, if the RV broke down or someone got injured, we were truly on our own. We found a campsite in a narrow valley beside a clear mountain stream, surrounded by towering pines and aspens that were just beginning to turn gold with autumn. The spot was perfect. Level ground for the RV, fresh water, and a natural windbreak formed by the valley walls. "This is it," Jake announced as we set up camp. "This is what we needed. No deadlines, no bosses, no traffic, just us and the mountains." That first night was perfect. We grilled steaks on the RV's propane grill, drank beer around a campfire, and talked about everything except work. The stars above us were unlike anything I'd ever seen. A brilliant tapestry of light undimmed by urban glow, so dense and bright it seemed like you could reach up and touch them. "You know what?" Jake said around midnight, gesturing at the star-filled sky with his beer bottle. "We should do this every year, make it a tradition." I was about to agree when we heard it, a voice calling from somewhere up the valley, faint but clearly human. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" We both froze, listening intently. The voice came again, definitely female, filled with desperation and pain. "Hello!" Jake shouted back. "Where are you?" "Down here. I'm hurt. Please help." The voice seemed to be coming from somewhere upstream, maybe a quarter-mile away in the darkness beyond our campfire's light. "We should go look," Jake said, already reaching for his flashlight. Something about the situation felt wrong to me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. "Maybe we should wait until morning," I suggested. "It's too easy to get lost in the dark." But Jake was already moving, his sense of civic duty overriding caution. "Someone's hurt, Marcus. We can't just ignore it." He was right, of course. If someone was genuinely in trouble, we had a moral obligation to help. But as we gathered our flashlights and headed into the darkness beyond our campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a mistake. The voice called out several more times as we hiked upstream, always from just ahead of us, always pleading for help. But something about it bothered me. The tone never varied. The words never changed. It was like listening to a recording being played over and over. "Hello," Jake called back each time. "Keep calling so we can find you." But the voice never responded to our calls, never acknowledged that it could hear us. It just kept repeating the same desperate plea. "Help! Please, somebody help me." We followed the stream for nearly a mile, stumbling over rocks and fallen logs in the darkness, before I finally convinced Jake to turn back. "Maybe she can't hear us," he said as we retraced our steps. "Maybe she's unconscious or trapped somewhere. Then she wouldn't be able to call for help," I pointed out. Back at our campsite, we sat by the dying fire and listened for more calls. They came sporadically throughout the night. Always the same words, always from the same direction, but never getting any closer or farther away. "Sound carries weird in the mountains," I said, remembering Carl's warning. "Maybe it's just echoes, or wind through the rocks." But Jake looked troubled. That sounded like a real person to me. A real person in real trouble. Wednesday morning, we decided to search the area in daylight. Following the stream upstream, we covered the same ground we'd traversed in darkness, looking for any sign of an injured hiker or abandoned campsite. We found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no evidence that anyone had ever been in the area except us. The stream valley was pristine wilderness, unmarked by human presence. "Maybe she made it out on her own," Jake suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. That afternoon, we hiked to a nearby ridge to get a better view of the surrounding area. From the summit, we could see for miles in every direction. Endless peaks and valleys stretching to the horizon, all of it empty of human life. "Look at that," Jake said, pointing to a distant valley. "Is that smoke?" I followed his gaze and saw a thin column of what looked like smoke rising from a valley maybe 5 miles to the east. But as I watched, it dispersed and reformed, moving in ways that didn't match wind patterns. "Probably just mist," I said, "or dust kicked up by animals." But the sight made me uneasy. We were supposed to be alone out here, miles from the nearest road or trail. The idea that there might be other people nearby, people who hadn't responded to our calls the night before, was somehow more unsettling than comforting. Wednesday night brought more voices. This time it wasn't just one person calling for help. We heard multiple voices, men, women, even what sounded like children, all calling from different directions around our campsite. "Help us! We're lost! Please, we're hurt! Can anyone hear us? Don't leave us here!" The voices seemed to surround us, coming from the darkness beyond our fire's reach. Some were close, others distant, but all filled with the same desperate urgency. Jake was on his feet immediately, flashlight in hand. "There's a whole group of them out there. We have to help." But this time, I was more skeptical. "Jake, think about it. A whole group of people, all injured or lost, all calling for help at the same time? In the middle of nowhere? It doesn't make sense." "Since when do emergencies make sense?" Jake demanded. "Maybe it's a plane crash or a hiking group that got separated and panicked." The voices continued calling, overlapping each other in a cacophony of pleas and desperate cries. But as I listened more carefully, I began to notice patterns. The same phrases repeated over and over. The voices never responded to our shouts. And, most disturbing of all, some of the voices sounded familiar. Not like people we knew, but like people we'd heard before. "Jake," I said slowly, "that woman's voice. The one calling from upstream. Doesn't it sound like the same voice from last night?" He listened for a moment, then shook his head. "I can't tell. They all sound scared." But I was becoming convinced that we were hearing the same voices repeated, like some kind of supernatural broken record. The realization should have been reassuring. If these weren't real people, then no one was actually in danger. Instead, it terrified me. What kind of place were we in where disembodied voices called for help in the darkness? That night, neither of us slept well. The voices continued until dawn, sometimes close enough that we expected to see figures emerge from the darkness, sometimes so distant they might have been echoes of echoes. But whenever we tried to follow them with our flashlights, they seemed to retreat just beyond the reach of our light. Thursday morning, I suggested we pack up and leave. "This place is getting to me," I admitted. "All those voices, the isolation. Maybe we should find a campground closer to civilization." But Jake was stubborn. "We're not going to let some weird acoustics run us off. This is probably just some natural phenomenon like those singing sands or musical rocks you read about." I wasn't convinced, but Jake had paid for half the RV rental and had as much say in our itinerary as I did. We decided to stay another few days, but to explore different areas of the wilderness during the day, hoping to find some explanation for the nocturnal voices. That's when we discovered the holes. We were hiking along a ridge about 3 miles from our campsite when Jake nearly stepped into what looked like a natural sinkhole. It was maybe 4 feet across and descended straight down into darkness. When we dropped a rock into it, we never heard it hit bottom. "Limestone country," I said, trying to sound knowledgeable. "Probably lots of caves and underground streams." But as we continued hiking, we found more holes. Dozens of them, scattered across the mountainside like a giant colander. Some were small enough to step over, others large enough to swallow a car. All of them descended into impenetrable darkness. "Jesus," Jake muttered, peering into one of the larger openings. "It's like the whole mountain is hollow." I was beginning to understand why this area felt so unsettling. We weren't just camping on the surface of the earth. We were camping on a thin shell covering an unknown underground world. The voices we'd been hearing could be coming from below us, echoing up through this network of hidden caverns. But that raised even more disturbing questions. Who or what was down there? And why did they only call out at night? Thursday afternoon, while exploring a different valley, we found evidence of previous campers. The remains of old fire rings, scattered pieces of camping gear, and something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark of a large pine tree, obviously done years ago, were the words, "The voices lie, don't go down." Below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Jenny is still calling. She's been dead 3 years." Jake studied the carvings with a frown. Probably just some kids trying to scare people. Urban legends and campfire stories. But I was remembering the stories Carl had told us, his warning about voices calling for help in the night. Maybe this wasn't the first time people had experienced what we were going through. That evening, we made a disturbing discovery. While organizing our gear, Jake realized that his expensive camera was missing. "I know, I had it this morning," he said, checking every compartment of his backpack. "I took pictures of those sinkholes." We searched the RV thoroughly, then retraced our hiking route with flashlights, looking for any place he might have dropped it. But the camera was simply gone, as if it had vanished into thin air. "Maybe it fell into one of those holes," I suggested. Jake shook his head. "I was careful around those, and I remember having it after we left the ridge." As we walked back to our campsite in the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The sensation was so strong that I kept turning around, scanning the shadows between the trees with my flashlight. But I never saw anything except empty forest. Thursday night, the voices were different. Instead of the usual desperate calls for help, we heard what sounded like normal conversation. People talking and laughing as if they were at a party or a family gathering. The voices were clearer than before, close enough that we could almost make out individual words. "Do you hear that?" Jake whispered. "It sounds like they're having a good time." The voices did sound happy, relaxed, and comfortable, but there was something wrong with the rhythm of the conversation. Something artificial about the way the laughter rose and fell. "Jake," I said slowly, "play back that video from yesterday. The one where you were talking to the camera about the sinkholes." He pulled out his phone and found the video. In it, he was narrating our discovery of the holes, describing their size and depth in his usual enthusiastic way. As the video played, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Mixed in with the happy conversation coming from the darkness around us was Jake's voice, repeating fragments of his narration from the video. "Maybe 4 feet across and descended straight down into darkness, like the whole mountain is hollow." The voice was definitely Jake's, but he was sitting right beside me, listening to himself speak from somewhere out in the forest. "That's not possible," Jake said, his face pale in the firelight. "That's my voice, but I'm not saying those things." The realization hit us both at the same time. Whatever was out there in the darkness had been listening to us, recording our voices somehow, and was now playing them back like some kind of twisted parrot. But that meant every voice we'd heard over the past 3 nights, all those desperate calls for help, might have been recordings of real people who had camped in this valley before us. People who had responded to the voices, gone out into the darkness to help, and never come back. "We're leaving," I said, standing up abruptly. "Right now. Tonight." But Jake was staring into the darkness with a strange expression on his face. "Wait. Listen." Mixed in with his own recorded voice, we could hear another familiar sound. The whir and click of his missing camera taking pictures. "Something has my camera," he said. "Something out there is using it." As if summoned by his words, we heard the electronic beep of the camera's flash charging, followed by the brief, brilliant flare of a strobe light somewhere in the trees. In that instant of illumination, I caught a glimpse of something that made me doubt my sanity. Standing maybe 30 yards from our campsite was a figure that looked exactly like Jake. Same height, same build, same clothes, even the same camera hanging around its neck. But its face was wrong. Too pale, too smooth, as if someone had tried to sculpt Jake's features from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The flash fired again, and I saw more figures standing between the trees, one that looked like me, one that might have been the woman whose voice we'd heard the first night, others that I didn't recognize but that all shared the same artificial quality, like wax museum figures that had learned to walk. "Jake," I whispered, "we need to get in the RV, now." But Jake was transfixed by the sight of his own double. "How is that possible? How is it wearing my face?" The fake Jake raised the camera and took another picture, the flash illuminating what looked like a small crowd of duplicate people scattered through the forest around our campsite. They all stood perfectly still, watching us with expressions of blank curiosity. I grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward the RV. "Move. Whatever those things are, we don't want to be out here with them." But as we reached the RV's door, we heard Jake's voice calling from the darkness. Not the recorded fragments from earlier, but new words spoken in his exact tone and inflection. Hey, Marcus, wait up. Don't go inside yet. I want to show you something. Jake and I looked at each other, both of us understanding the implications. If that thing could perfectly mimic his voice, producing new words instead of just playing back recordings, then it was learning, adapting, becoming more sophisticated with each passing hour. We locked ourselves inside the RV, but sleep was impossible. All night long, we heard voices outside, our own voices, having conversations we'd never had, saying things we'd never said. Sometimes the fake Marcus would call to the real Jake, trying to lure him outside. Sometimes the fake Jake would plead with the real me, claiming he was hurt and needed help. But the most terrifying moment came around 3 a.m. when we heard both of our voices together, talking and laughing as if we were sitting around the campfire having a normal conversation. "Listen to that," the fake Marcus said in my exact voice. "They're scared. They think we're dangerous." "Poor guys," the fake Jake replied. "They don't understand that we just want to be friends." "Should we invite them out?" fake Marcus asked. "I'd like to get a closer look at them." "Not yet," fake Jake said. "Let them get used to us first. We have all the time in the world." The conversation continued for hours, with our own voices discussing us like we were interesting specimens in a zoo. The worst part was how natural it sounded. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn Jake and I were outside having a perfectly normal chat. Friday morning, we tried to leave. The RV started without any problems, but as we drove toward what we thought was the road out of the valley, we discovered that the landscape had changed. Paths that had been clear the day before were now blocked by fallen trees. The dirt road we'd followed into the valley seemed to have vanished entirely, replaced by impassable boulder fields. "This is impossible," Jake said, studying our map. "Roads don't just disappear." But as we drove in circles for most of the morning, it became clear that we were trapped. Every route out of the valley was blocked, as if the geography itself was conspiring to keep us there. Even more disturbing, we began to see evidence of other stranded travelers. Rusted car parts scattered in the brush, the remains of tents and camping gear, personal belongings that suggested dozens of people had been trapped in this valley over the years. "Look at this," Jake said, holding up a wallet he'd found near a collapsed campsite. The driver's license inside showed a photo of a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, issued 15 years ago. "Jenny," I said, remembering the carving on the tree. Somebody wrote that Jenny had been calling for 3 years. We found more evidence as the day wore on. Pieces of clothing, camping equipment from different eras, personal items that told the story of people who had come to this valley and never left. But we never found any bodies, just belongings scattered as if their owners had simply vanished. Friday night, the things outside stopped pretending to be us. Instead of mimicking our voices, they began showing us their true nature. We heard sounds that no human throat could make, clicking and chittering like insects, low harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the RV's walls, and underneath it all, a rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat. Through the RV's windows, we could see shapes moving in the darkness, but they no longer bothered to maintain human appearance. They moved wrong, with too many joints bending in impossible directions. They were tall and thin, stretched out like shadows given substance, and when they passed in front of our fire, they cast no shadows of their own. "What are they?" Jake whispered, peering through a crack in the window blinds. I didn't answer because I didn't know. They weren't human, that much was clear, but they weren't quite animal either. They seemed to be something in between, or something else entirely. Creatures that had learned to approximate human behavior but couldn't quite get it right. Around midnight, they began to sing. It wasn't music in any recognizable sense, but a complex harmony of sounds that seemed to come from the earth itself. The song had a hypnotic quality, pulling at something deep in my brain, making me want to go outside and join them. "Don't listen," I told Jake, but I could see him struggling against the same compulsion. "Cover your ears." But the song seemed to penetrate our skulls regardless of what we did to block it out. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, promising things I couldn't name but desperately wanted. I must have dozed off despite everything because I woke Saturday morning to find Jake gone. The RV's door was standing open, letting in the cold mountain air. Jake's sleeping bag was empty, his shoes and jacket still in their usual places. He had gone outside barefoot in his pajamas into the pre-dawn darkness. I called his name, but got no response. Grabbing a flashlight and throwing on some clothes, I went outside to search for him. I found him about 100 yards from the RV, standing at the edge of one of the large sinkholes we'd discovered earlier. He was perfectly motionless, staring down into the darkness below. "Jake," I called, but he didn't respond or acknowledge my presence. I approached carefully, remembering stories about sleepwalkers and the dangers of waking them abruptly. But as I got closer, I could see that his eyes were open, focused on something far below in the depths of the hole. "They're beautiful," he said in a voice that was flat and emotionless. "They want us to come down and join them. They've been lonely for so long. Jake, step away from the hole. You're too close to the edge." He turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just solid darkness that seemed to swallow light. "You can hear them too, can't you, Marcus? They're calling to us. They want to show us their world." I could hear something. A faint singing rising from the depths of the hole. The same hypnotic harmony that had filled the air the night before. But I fought against it, knowing instinctively that whatever lay at the bottom of that hole was not something I wanted to meet. "Jake, fight it. Whatever's down there, it's not friendly. It's been trapping people here for years." "Not trapping," Jake said with that same emotionless tone. "Collecting. Gathering friends and family for the deep places. We'll be so happy down there, Marcus. No more stress, no more loneliness, no more struggle." He took a step closer to the edge of the hole, and I realized I was about to lose my best friend to whatever lived in the underground darkness. I did the only thing I could think of. I tackled him. We rolled away from the hole's edge, Jake fighting against me with strength that seemed beyond human limits. But the moment we were more than 10 feet from the opening, he collapsed as if someone had cut his strings. "Where am I?" he asked, looking around in confusion. "Why are we outside?" "You were sleepwalking," I said, helping him to his feet, "walking straight toward that hole." Jake stared at the sinkhole with horror. "I remember. Voices calling from down there, promising things. God, Marcus, what is this place?" That's when I made the decision that probably saved our lives. I didn't care about blocked roads or impossible geography. We were getting out of this valley, even if I had to drive the RV straight up the mountainside. We broke camp in record time, throwing our gear into the RV without bothering to organize anything. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the sinkholes scattered across the valley floor. Something was moving down there in the darkness, shapes that writhed and flowed like living smoke. And as I watched, more of those pale, stretched figures began emerging from the holes, climbing toward the surface with movements that hurt to watch. "They don't want us to leave," Jake said, his voice tight with fear. "Too bad," I replied, gunning the RV's engine. "We're going home." The drive out of the valley was a nightmare. Trees fell across our path minutes after we passed, rocks tumbled down from impossible angles, and the dirt road seemed to shift and change even as we drove on it. But I kept the accelerator pressed to the floor, crashing through obstacles and taking shortcuts that should have been impossible for a 24-foot RV. Behind us, I could see the pale figures in my mirrors, running after us with that horrible wrong-jointed gait. But they were surface dwellers now, and something about the daylight seemed to weaken them. They fell further and further behind as we climbed toward the main road. We didn't stop driving until we reached Denver. The RV rental company was surprisingly understanding about the damage to their vehicle. Cracked windshield, scraped paint, and dents from our desperate escape through the wilderness. Carl Peterson looked over the damage with knowing eyes. "Wind Rivers?" he asked. I nodded. "You boys are lucky to be alive," he said. "Most folks who hear the voices don't make it back." "What are they?" Jake asked. "What's really out there?" Carl was quiet for a long time, studying our faces. Finally, he spoke. "My grandfather was Shoshone," he said. "Grew up hearing the old stories about places where the earth is thin, where things from the deep places can reach through. The Wind Rivers got more of those thin spots than most places." "But what do they want?" I pressed. "Company," Carl said simply. "They've been alone down there for thousands of years, maybe longer. They remember when the surface world was different, when there were more of their kind. Now they collect people, trying to rebuild what they lost. Collect people, Jake repeated. What happens to them? Carl shrugged. Nobody knows for sure, but sometimes, years later, folks hear familiar voices calling from the deep places. Voices of people who went missing in those mountains. We flew back to Chicago that evening, neither of us wanting to spend another night in RV or tent for the foreseeable future. But even back in civilization, surrounded by the familiar sounds of traffic and human activity, I couldn't shake the memory of those voices. That was 6 months ago. Jake and I don't talk about the trip much, though we both have trouble sleeping and neither of us has any interest in camping anymore. But sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I think I can hear something calling from far away. It sounds like my own voice, promising wonderful things if I'll just come back to the mountains. Sometimes it sounds like Jake's voice, or the voices of friends and family, all of them pleading with me to return to the deep places where we can all be together forever. I've done some research since we got back. The Wind River Range has one of the highest rates of missing persons in the country. People who vanish without a trace, leaving behind only abandoned campsites and scattered belongings. The official explanations are always the same: exposure, animal attacks, falls into hidden crevasses. But I know better. I know about the things that live in the underground darkness, mimicking human voices and collecting surface dwellers for purposes we can't understand. Sometimes I wonder how many of those missing people are still down there, calling out in voices that sound just like ours, trying to lure new victims into the deep places. And sometimes, God help me, I wonder what it would be like to answer their call, to step into one of those holes and join the chorus of voices that sing in the darkness beneath the earth. The mountains are calling, and part of me wants to go home, but I won't. I can't. Because I know that the thing wearing my face is still out there, waiting in the depths, practicing my voice and learning my mannerisms for the next time unsuspecting campers make the mistake of answering its call for help. The voices in the valley never stop calling. They just learn new names to call out in the darkness. Marcus Stone was found dead in his Chicago apartment 3 weeks after providing this account. According to police reports, he appeared to have jumped from his 15th floor balcony. Neighbors reported hearing him talking to someone in the hours before his death, though his apartment was empty when investigators arrived. His friend Jake Morrison disappeared while hiking alone in Wisconsin's Chequamegon National Forest 2 days later. Neither the voices nor the phenomena described in this account have been verified by park authorities. We should have never gone to the Badlands. I'm Michael Williams. I was 28 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything. Sarah and I had been together for 3 years when we decided to take that RV trip across South Dakota. She'd found this vintage Winnebago on Craigslist, a 1987 model with wood paneling and avocado green upholstery that screamed divorce sale. The seller was an elderly man named Henderson, whose hands shook when he handed over the keys. "You folks be careful out there," he'd said, his roomy eyes fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. "Some places ain't meant for visitors." Sarah had laughed it off, that infectious giggle that made me fall in love with her in the first place. She had this way of finding magic in the mundane, of turning a gas station coffee into an adventure. Her dark hair caught the late afternoon sun as she inspected our new home on wheels, running her fingers along the faded decals of national parks we'd never visited. "Look, Michael," she'd called out, pointing to a small sticker near the rear bumper. "Badlands National Park, 1987. This old girl's been there before." That should have been our first warning. We left Minneapolis on a Thursday morning in early October, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes you believe in fresh starts. Sarah had quit her job at the marketing firm 2 weeks prior, claiming she needed space to breathe and think. I'd taken a leave of absence from the accounting office, burning through vacation days I'd been hoarding for years. We told ourselves this was about reconnecting, about escaping the suffocating routine of city life. The truth was, we'd been drifting apart for months. Quiet dinners, conversations that never went deeper than weekend plans. We were two people sharing a bed but living separate lives, and we both knew it. This trip was supposed to fix something that might have been beyond repair. The drive to South Dakota was pleasant enough. We took our time, stopping at roadside diners and quirky attractions. Sarah photographed everything. Water towers shaped like corn cobs, the world's largest ball of twine. A museum dedicated entirely to barbed wire. She seemed lighter somehow, more like the woman I'd met at that coffee shop 3 years ago. We reached the Badlands on Saturday evening, just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The landscape was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A moonscape of eroded buttes and layered rock formations that stretched endlessly in every direction. The stone was painted in shades of cream and rust, deep burgundy and pale yellow, as if some giant had splattered watercolors across the prairie. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, pressing her face against the passenger window. "Like Mars, but prettier." I pulled into the campground as darkness fell. Most of the RV sites were empty. Not surprising for October, when the summer tourists had long since fled back to their suburban lives. We chose a spot on the far edge of the campground, away from the few other vehicles scattered about. Sarah wanted privacy, she said, room to watch the stars without the glare of someone else's porch light. That first night was perfect. We grilled burgers on the tiny propane stove, drank wine from plastic cups, and talked until nearly midnight. Real conversation, the kind we hadn't shared in months. Sarah told me about the novel she wanted to write, about characters who lived in her imagination and demanded to be set free. I confessed my growing dissatisfaction with my job, my feeling that I was sleepwalking through life. "Maybe we should just keep driving," she said, curling up against my chest. "Sell everything and live like nomads. We could write about our adventures, document the real America." "And eat what, exactly?" I teased, but part of me was intrigued by the idea. "Love," she said, grinning up at me. "We'll sustain ourselves on love and gas station coffee." I kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of dried sweat and the faint sweetness of her shampoo. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about us. We made love that night with a passion that had been absent for too long, our bodies moving together in the narrow RV bed while the wind whistled through the strange rock formations outside. Afterward, as Sarah slept curled against my side, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the Badlands night. Coyotes calling to each other across impossible distances, the rustle of something moving through the sparse grass, the occasional crack of cooling stone. Sunday morning brought our first hint that something was wrong. I woke to find Sarah standing at the kitchenette, staring out the window with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. Her usually expressive face was blank, almost mask-like. "What are you looking at?" I asked, padding over to join her. She pointed toward a formation about 100 yards from our campsite, a tall spire of layered rock that twisted upward like a frozen tornado. I could have sworn that wasn't there yesterday. I looked where she was pointing, trying to remember the view from the night before. The landscape had been shrouded in darkness when we'd arrived, and I'd been more focused on leveling the RV than memorizing the geological features. "It must have been," I said. "Rock formations don't just appear overnight." Sarah nodded slowly, but she kept staring at the spire. "I suppose you're right. The light was different yesterday. Everything looks different in the morning." We spent the day hiking some of the marked trails, marveling at the otherworldly beauty of the place. The Badlands were a study in extremes, patches of lush grass that seemed to glow green against the pale stone, sudden drop-offs that revealed valleys hundreds of feet deep, fossil beds where ancient creatures lay entombed in sediment millions of years old. Sarah seemed more like herself as the day progressed, pointing out interesting rock formations and cloud shapes, collecting small stones that caught her eye. We ate lunch at a scenic overlook, watching turkey vultures circle lazily overhead. "They're beautiful," Sarah said, shading her eyes to track the bird's flight. "So graceful." "They're scavengers," I pointed out. "They eat dead things." "So, that doesn't make them less beautiful. Death is just another part of life, right? They're cleaning up, making room for new things to grow." Something in her tone made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. She spoke about death with a casual acceptance that seemed uncharacteristic. That evening, we drove to a different area of the park to watch the sunset. The colors were spectacular. deep oranges and purples that seemed to set the rock formations on fire. Sarah was quiet during the drive back to our campsite, staring out the window with that same blank expression I'd noticed that morning. "You okay?" I asked as we pulled into our site. "Fine," she said, but her voice sounded distant. "Just tired." The second night was when things began to go truly wrong. I woke around 3 a.m. to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. The RV door was standing open, letting in the cold night air. I called her name, but got no response. Grabbing a flashlight, I stumbled outside in my underwear and bare feet. The night was eerily quiet. No wind, no coyotes, no insects. Even the ever-present hum of the RV's generator seemed muted. I called Sarah's name again, my voice swallowed by the vast emptiness around us. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, picking up nothing but scattered camping chairs and the dead remains of our campfire. I was about to check the bathhouse when I heard it. A soft singing, coming from somewhere beyond the twisted spire Sarah had noticed that morning. The voice was unmistakably hers, but the melody was nothing I recognized. It was haunting and wordless, rising and falling like wind through the stone formations. I followed the sound, my bare feet picking up sharp pebbles and thorns. I found her about 50 yards from the RV, standing perfectly still beside a small depression in the ground. She was naked, her skin pale as moonlight, singing that strange melody while staring down into what looked like a natural well. "Sarah?" I approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "What are you doing out here?" She stopped singing and turned to look at me. In the harsh LED glare of my flashlight, her eyes looked different, darker somehow, as if her pupils had expanded to swallow the color. She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was too wide, revealing too many teeth. "I was listening," she said in a voice that was almost but not quite hers. "They're down there, you know, waiting. Who's down there?" I played the flashlight beam across the depression. It was maybe 6 feet across and seemed to descend beyond the reach of my light. The walls were smooth stone, worn by countless years of water erosion. "The old ones," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "They've been sleeping for so long. They're ready to wake up now." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Come on, let's go back to the RV. You're going to catch pneumonia out here." I reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch. "Don't you want to listen?" she asked, tilting her head with that eerie smile still plastered across her face. "They have such beautiful songs." I grabbed her wrist, gently but firmly, and began leading her back toward our campsite. She didn't resist, but she kept looking back over her shoulder at the depression, humming that haunting melody under her breath. Back in the RV, I wrapped her in blankets and cranked up the heater. Her skin was like marble, cold and pale. She seemed to snap out of whatever trance she'd been in, blinking in confusion as she looked around the familiar interior. "How did I get outside?" she asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "You don't remember?" She shook her head slowly. "I was dreaming about singing." There was singing, and something calling my name. She looked up at me with her normal eyes, brown and warm and confused. I must have been sleepwalking. I haven't done that since I was a kid. I didn't mention the well or her strange behavior. Instead, I made her hot chocolate and sat with her until she fell asleep again, curled up against my chest like a child seeking comfort. But I stayed awake for the rest of the night, listening for any sound that might suggest she was moving again. Monday brought new strangeness. We'd planned to explore more of the park, but when I started the RV that morning, the GPS showed our location as somewhere in eastern Montana, nearly 300 miles from where we'd camped. I restarted the system twice, but it kept insisting we were in the middle of nowhere, hours from the nearest town. "Technology," Sarah said with a shrug when I showed her the screen. "It's probably just a glitch." But when I tried to use my phone's GPS, it showed the same impossible location. Even stranger, my phone showed no signal bars, despite having full service the day before. Sarah's phone was dead, completely drained despite being plugged in all night. "Weird," she said, but she didn't seem particularly concerned. If anything, she seemed almost pleased by our electronic isolation. We decided to stick to marked trails that day, not wanting to risk getting lost without reliable navigation. But even the marked trails seemed different somehow. Wooden signs that I was certain had pointed east the day before now pointed north. A trail we'd hiked Sunday afternoon ended abruptly at a cliff face that hadn't been there before. "I think we took a wrong turn," I said, studying the park map we'd picked up at the visitor center. Sarah was examining the cliff face, running her hands over the smooth stone. "Look at this," she said. "The rock here is different. Older." She was right. Where most of the Badlands formations were composed of layered sedimentary rock in pale colors, this cliff was dark stone shot through with veins of what looked like silver. The surface was covered in strange markings. Not quite symbols, not quite natural erosion patterns. "Probably just mineral deposits," I said, but the markings made me uncomfortable. They seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. Sarah pressed her ear against the stone. "There's something behind here," she said. "I can hear it moving." I listened but heard nothing except the distant call of a hawk. "Come on, let's head back. I want to find a ranger station and report the GPS issues." But when we tried to retrace our steps, the trail seemed to lead us in circles. Every landmark looked familiar, yet we never seemed to get any closer to the parking area where we'd left the RV. The sun, which had been high overhead when we started our hike, was now slanting toward the western horizon. "We've been walking for hours," Sarah said, but her voice held no concern. If anything, she sounded content, like someone enjoying a pleasant stroll through a familiar park. I checked my watch. It read 3:47 p.m., but I could have sworn it was barely past noon when we'd started our hike. More disturbing, the digital display seemed to flicker occasionally, showing times that made no sense. 25:83, 14:92, 8. "My watch is going crazy," I said, showing Sarah the impossible numbers. She glanced at it briefly, then shrugged. "Time is relative out here. The old ones know that. They've been here since before humans learned to count days." Something cold crawled up my spine. "What did you say?" Sarah blinked, looking confused. "I said, I don't know what I said. Sorry, I feel a little lightheaded. Maybe we should rest." We found a flat area beside the trail and sat down to share a bottle of water. Sarah leaned against my shoulder, her body warm and solid and reassuringly normal. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the strange events of the past day were just stress and unfamiliar surroundings playing tricks on our minds. Then Sarah pointed toward a distant butte. "That's where they sleep," she said in a conversational tone. "Deep in the heart of the stone. They've been dreaming for thousands of years, but the dreams are getting stronger. Soon, they'll be strong enough to wake up." "Sarah, you're scaring me. Who are they?" She looked at me with an expression of mild surprise. I don't know why I said that. It just felt true, somehow. She rubbed her temples. "I think I might be getting a migraine. The air pressure here feels wrong." We found our way back to the RV just as darkness was falling. I was relieved to see the familiar bulk of our temporary home, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering gloom. But something was off. Our campsite looked different. Not wrong, exactly, but subtly altered. The picnic table was on the wrong side of the fire pit. The electrical hookup was in a different location. Even the trees looked different, as if they'd grown and shifted when we weren't looking. "Did we camp in this exact spot last night?" I asked. Sarah studied the area with a frown. "I think so. But you know how it is with unfamiliar places. Everything looks different until you get used to it." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside the RV made me jump. The whisper of wind through stone, the distant call of coyotes, the soft patter of what might have been rain but couldn't be, since the sky was clear. Around midnight, I heard Sarah get up and move toward the RV's door. "Where are you going?" I asked, instantly alert. "Bathroom," she said, but something in her voice sounded wrong. Too flat, too emotionless. I listened to her footsteps as she moved outside, then waited for the sound of the bathhouse door. It never came. Instead, I heard that same haunting melody she'd been humming the night before, growing fainter as she moved away from the RV. I threw on clothes and grabbed the flashlight, but when I stepped outside, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. I called her name, my voice echoing off the stone formations. The only response was my own words bouncing back at me, distorted and strange. I searched for nearly an hour, following the faint sound of singing deeper into the labyrinthine passages between the rock formations. The melody seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, leading me in circles through narrow canyons and across windswept plateaus. My flashlight beam revealed nothing but empty stone and sparse vegetation. When I finally returned to the RV, exhausted and frightened, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchenette table with a cup of coffee, looking perfectly normal. "Where have you been?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "I woke up and you were gone." "I was looking for you," I said. "You left to go to the bathroom and never came back." Sarah shook her head. "I haven't left the RV all night. I've been sitting here reading." She held up a paperback novel, one of the trashy romance novels she always brought on trips. "But I heard you singing. I followed the sound for almost an hour. Michael, I think you might have been dreaming. You've been really stressed lately. And this place—" She gestured toward the windows beyond which the Badlands waited in the darkness. "It's kind of unsettling, don't you think? All that emptiness and silence. It could mess with anyone's head." I wanted to argue, but doubt was creeping in. Had I been dreaming? The events of the past few days felt increasingly surreal, like something I might have imagined rather than experienced. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe the isolation and stress were getting to me. But as she spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sarah's coffee cup was bone dry, despite being full of steaming coffee just moments before. And when she turned the page of her book, I caught a glimpse of the text. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. The letters seemed to crawl across the page like living things. Tuesday morning brought our worst day yet. I woke to find Sarah standing outside the RV, staring at that twisted spire she'd noticed on our first day. But something was wrong with the formation. It was taller than before, significantly taller, and the stone had taken on a darker hue, as if it had been stained with something I didn't want to identify. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, joining her in the crisp morning air. "Not long," she said, but her voice had that flat, emotionless quality I was beginning to dread. "I was watching it grow." "Watching what grow?" She pointed at the spire. "It's been getting taller all night. Listen carefully and you can hear the stone stretching." I strained my ears but heard nothing except the usual sounds of morning in the wilderness. Birds calling, insects buzzing, the distant hum of highway traffic. But as I watched the spire, I could have sworn I saw it move slightly, like a plant reaching toward the sun. "Rock doesn't grow, Sarah. This rock does." She turned to look at me and I nearly gasped. Her eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just solid darkness that seemed to swallow light. "The old ones are stirring. They're reshaping the stone to suit their needs." I grabbed her shoulders and shook her gently. "Sarah, listen to me. You're scaring me. I think we should leave this place. Today." She blinked and her eyes were normal again, brown and warm and confused. "Leave? But we just got here, and I love it here. Don't you feel it, Michael? The peace? The sense of belonging?" I didn't feel peaceful. I felt like we were being watched by something vast and patient and hungry. But Sarah seemed genuinely bewildered by my suggestion that we leave, so I dropped the subject for the moment. We spent the morning packing up the campsite, getting ready for what I hoped would be our departure. But when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. The dashboard lights flickered erratically, showing readings that made no sense. The fuel gauge indicated we had negative gas. The temperature gauge showed the engine was running at several thousand degrees. "Must be the battery," Sarah said, but she didn't sound concerned. If anything, she seemed pleased by our mechanical difficulties. I checked under the hood and found something that made my hands shake. The engine block was covered in that same dark stone I'd seen on the cliff face, as if the rock had somehow grown over the metal. Worse, the stone was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat. "This is impossible," I muttered, but the evidence was right in front of me. I tried calling for help, but our phones still showed no signal. Even more disturbing, when I tried to use the RV's CB radio to contact other campers or park rangers, all I got was static punctuated by what sounded like whispered voices speaking in that same unknown language I'd seen in Sarah's book. We were stranded. Sarah took the news with unsettling calm. "Maybe it's a sign," she said. "Maybe we're supposed to stay here. Supposed to stay here for what? For them to wake up." She said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Someone needs to witness the awakening. Someone needs to welcome them back. That afternoon, while I worked futilely on the engine, Sarah announced she was going for a walk. I tried to dissuade her, but she insisted she needed some time alone to think. I watched her disappear into the maze of rock formations, her small figure dwarfed by the towering stone spires. She was gone for 6 hours. When she finally returned, the sun was setting, and I was on the verge of hiking out to find help, despite having no idea which direction to go. Sarah emerged from between two large buttes, walking with that same eerily calm pace I'd been noticing more and more often. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "I was about to call search and rescue." "With whom?" she asked reasonably. "Our phones don't work, remember?" "Sarah, I've been worried sick. You've been acting strange since we got here, and now you disappear for hours." "I found something," she interrupted, her eyes bright with excitement. "Something wonderful. Come on, I want to show you." She took my hand and began leading me toward the area where she'd emerged. Her skin was ice cold again, and when I looked closely at her face, I noticed small changes that made my stomach clench with fear. Her features were subtly different. Her nose a little sharper, her cheekbones more pronounced, her smile a fraction too wide. "Sarah, I think you need to see a doctor. You don't look well." "I feel better than I have in years," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite human. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be." She led me through a narrow canyon I didn't remember seeing before, past walls of stone covered in those strange silver-veined markings. The passages twisted and turned, leading ever deeper into the heart of the Badlands. As we walked, I began to hear it, a low humming that seemed to come from the stone itself, a sound so deep it was felt rather than heard. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, squeezing my hand. "That's their song. They're getting stronger." We emerged into a circular clearing surrounded by towering spires of dark stone. In the center of the clearing was the depression Sarah had been standing over during her first sleepwalking episode. But it was much larger now, at least 20 feet across and descending into absolute darkness. "This is where they sleep," Sarah said reverently. "This is where they'll emerge when the time is right." I peered into the pit, trying to see the bottom, but my flashlight beam was swallowed by the darkness. Yet I could feel something down there. A presence vast and patient and utterly alien. "Sarah, we need to get away from here. This place isn't natural." She laughed, but it wasn't her laugh. It was the sound of wind whistling through hollow stone. "Nothing is natural, Michael. Natural is just a word we use for things we understand. But there are older truths, older realities. The old ones knew that. They built this place as a doorway, a passage between what was and what will be." As she spoke, the markings on the surrounding stone began to glow with a faint silver light. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and I felt something tugging at the edges of my consciousness, a presence trying to worm its way into my thoughts. "Fight it," I told myself, backing away from the pit. "This isn't real. This is just stress and isolation," and a hand erupted from the darkness below, grasping the edge of the pit. The fingers were too long, jointed in places where human fingers shouldn't bend. As I watched in horror, something began pulling itself up from the depths, something that might once have been human but was now something else entirely. "They're waking up," Sarah said with joy. "Finally, they're waking up." More hands appeared, then arms, then shapes that hurt to look at directly. They moved like spiders, all joints and angles but their faces. Their faces were almost human. Almost, but not quite. The features were stretched and distorted, as if someone had tried to sculpt human faces from memory and gotten it slightly wrong. Sarah, run! I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away from the pit, but she wouldn't move. She stood there smiling, that too wide smile as the creatures climbed out of the darkness, their silver-veined skin glowing in the twilight. One of them approached us, moving with that same eerie calm I'd been noticing in Sarah. When it spoke, its voice was like stones grinding together. "The vessel is ready," it said, looking directly at Sarah. "The preparation is complete." "I've been waiting," Sarah replied in a voice that was definitely not her own. "I've been calling to you in my dreams." That's when I understood. The sleepwalking, the strange behavior, the gradual changes in her appearance. Sarah hadn't been acting strangely. Something had been slowly taking over, using her as a doorway into our world. I turned and ran. Behind me I heard Sarah laughing. Or the thing wearing Sarah's face laughing. It was a sound like breaking glass, full of malice and alien joy. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran through the twisting canyons, guided by nothing but panic and the desperate hope that I could find my way back to some semblance of civilization. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, then I crawled, then I dragged myself forward on my belly like a wounded animal. The stone formations seemed to shift around me, passages opening and closing, leading me deeper into the labyrinth rather than out of it. When dawn finally came, I found myself back at our campsite. The RV was gone. In its place stood one of those twisted spires of dark stone, covered in glowing silver veins. And Sarah was there, sitting calmly at our picnic table as if nothing had happened. "Good morning," she said brightly. "Sleep well?" But it wasn't Sarah. Not anymore. The thing wearing her face was a perfect replica, but the eyes were all wrong. Too knowing, too ancient, too amused by some cosmic joke I couldn't understand. "Where is she?" I demanded. "What did you do with Sarah?" The Sarah thing tilted its head, considering the question. "She's safe," it said finally. "She's part of us now. Part of something greater than she ever could have been alone. I want her back. You can't have her back, but you can join her. The transformation doesn't have to be unpleasant." She barely felt a thing. The thing that looked like Sarah stood up and walked toward me. With each step, its form seemed to flicker and shift, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath the human mask. Angles and shadows and impossible geometries that made my eyes water. "We've been alone for so long," it said in Sarah's voice, "dreaming in the dark, waiting for the world to change enough for us to return. But we're awake now, and we're lonely. We want companions. We want friends." I stumbled backward, trying to put distance between myself and the thing, but the stone formation seemed to be closing in around me. The spires were moving, growing, reaching toward each other like fingers preparing to grasp. "The process is already beginning," the Sarah thing said. "Can't you feel it? The way the stone calls to your bones? The way the silver veins sing in harmony with your blood?" I could feel it. God help me. I could feel something changing inside me, something responding to the alien song that filled the air. My vision was beginning to shift, showing me colors that had no names and dimensions that shouldn't exist. "Fight it," I told myself. "Remember who you are. Remember Sarah. The real Sarah." But even as I struggled against the transformation, part of me was curious about what lay on the other side. The pain and loneliness of the past few months seemed trivial compared to the promise of joining something vast and eternal. The Sarah thing had said she was safe, that she was part of something greater. Maybe it would be a relief to stop fighting, to let go of my humanity and become part of something larger than myself. The thought terrified me more than anything else that had happened. It wasn't my thought. It was theirs, creeping into my consciousness like poison. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I turned and ran again. This time, I didn't stop. I ran through passages that shouldn't have existed, past formations that defied geological possibility, over ground that felt soft and yielding like flesh. Behind me, I could hear the Sarah thing calling my name, its voice growing more distorted with each repetition until it sounded like wind howling through empty spaces. I ran until the sun was high overhead, until the alien landscape began to give way to something more familiar. normal sedimentary rock in familiar colors, marked trails with wooden signs that pointed in logical directions, the sound of highway traffic in the distance. When I finally stumbled into the visitor center, babbling about missing persons and impossible rock formations, the park rangers were sympathetic but skeptical. They organized a search party and spent 3 days combing the area where I claimed our campsite had been. They found nothing. No RV, no traces of human habitation, no evidence that anyone named Sarah Rodriguez had ever existed. According to their records, I had entered the park alone. My registration showed a single occupant, and my credit card receipts were all for one person. The rangers suggested I might have suffered a mental breakdown brought on by isolation and stress. They recommended psychiatric evaluation and gave me the number for a crisis counselor. One of them drove me to the nearest town, where I spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility being treated for what the doctors called acute stress reaction with psychotic features. But I know what I experienced. I know Sarah was real, and I know something took her. I've tried to research the Badlands, looking for any mention of the strange rock formations or the ancient presence I encountered. Most sources describe it as a relatively young geological formation, created by erosion over the past 500,000 years. But buried in obscure academic papers and forgotten folklore collections, I found hints of something older. The Lakota people have stories about places in the Badlands where the earth is thin, where ancient spirits sleep beneath the stone. Early explorers wrote about formations that seemed to shift and change when no one was looking. There are reports from the 1800s of people disappearing in the area, only to return days later with no memory of where they'd been and subtle changes in their personality and appearance. The U.S. Geological Survey has a file on seismic anomalies in the region, underground vibrations that don't match any known geological process. The frequency and pattern are almost musical, the reports note, like a song being sung in the depths of the earth. I've also found records of other couples who visited the Badlands and returned different. Divorce records where one spouse claimed the other had changed completely during their trip. Missing person reports where someone disappeared from a campsite only to return claiming they'd never left. Medical records documenting sudden onset of unusual psychological symptoms following visits to the park. The patterns are there if you know how to look for them, but no one wants to see. It's easier to dismiss these things as coincidence, stress, or mental illness. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about Sarah. Not the thing that was wearing her face at the end, but the real Sarah. The woman who laughed at roadside attractions and collected interesting stones. In my dreams, she's calling to me from somewhere far away, telling me she's trapped and needs my help. But when I wake up, I can't shake the feeling that those dreams aren't coming from my subconscious. They feel like transmissions, like someone trying to contact me across an impossible distance. The worst part is that I'm starting to want to answer. I've been back to the Badlands 3 times in the past year, not to the main park areas where tourists go, but to the remote sections where few people venture. Each time, I found traces of something that shouldn't exist. Rock formations that don't appear on any geological survey. Markings that look almost like writing. Areas where my electronic devices malfunction in ways that remind me of that terrible week. Last month, I found a camping area that looked familiar. A twisted spire of dark stone rose from the prairie, covered in veins of silver that glowed faintly in the moonlight. And sitting at a weathered picnic table, as if she'd been waiting for me, was a woman who looked exactly like Sarah. "Hello, Michael," she said in a voice like wind through stone. "I've missed you." I should have run. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around and leave and never come back. But I was so tired of being alone, so tired of doubting my own memories and sanity. And she looked so much like Sarah. Not the distorted thing I'd encountered a year ago, but the real Sarah. The woman I'd loved. "I know you're not her," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Does it matter?" the Sarah thing asked. "I have her memories, her feelings for you. I remember the coffee shop where you met, the way you made me laugh on our first date, the night you told me you loved me. In every way that matters, I am her. That's the terrible truth that's been eating at me for months. If something has all of a person's memories, their personality, their capacity for love, what's the difference? What makes us human except the continuity of our experiences and emotions? The Sarah thing stood up and walked toward me. This time, I didn't run. I let her take my hand, let her lead me toward the dark spire where I knew others were waiting. As we walked, I felt that familiar tugging at my consciousness, the presence that wanted to reshape me into something new. But maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Maybe transformation was just another word for growth, for becoming something more than what you were before. Maybe the old ones weren't invaders but liberators, freeing us from the prison of our limited human perspective. These thoughts feel like my own, but I'm no longer sure what that means. I'm writing this account on my laptop, sitting in a motel room 50 miles from the Badlands. Tomorrow, I'm going back. Not to investigate or to try to rescue Sarah. I understand now that she can't be rescued, because rescue implies she's being held against her will. But I can join her. I can become part of something vast and eternal and patient. I can stop fighting against the song that's been growing louder in my head for months. The silver voice that promises peace and unity, and an end to the terrible loneliness of human existence. If someone finds this account, don't come looking for me. Don't try to warn the authorities or investigate what I've described. The Badlands are beautiful this time of year, and the old ones are always looking for new friends. Just remember that love takes many forms, and sometimes the most profound transformation can look like loss to those who don't understand. I can hear Sarah calling to me now. Her voice carried on the wind that blows across the prairie. She's telling me about the wonders that wait beneath the stone, the songs that echo through chambers older than human civilization. I think I'm ready to listen. This account was found on a laptop in room 237 of the Prairie Vista Motel in Wall, South Dakota. The registered guest, Michael Williams, 28, of Minneapolis, Minnesota, disappeared 3 days prior to the discovery. His vehicle was found abandoned in Badlands National Park. Despite extensive searches, Mr. Williams has not been located. Park officials report no unusual seismic activity or geological anomalies in the area. The laptop has been turned over to local authorities. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Olympic National Park. I'm David Jones, and I was 35 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The whole rainforest was supposed to be our perfect family getaway. Jennifer had been working 80-hour weeks at the law firm. I'd been buried in construction contracts until 10 p.m. every night, and our kids, Logan, 10, and Lily, 8, had been spending more time with babysitters than with us. We needed this trip. We needed to remember why we'd become a family in the first place. Look at this place, Jennifer breathed as we drove the winding road into the heart of Olympic National Park that Thursday afternoon in late September. It's like something from a fairy tale. She was right. The whole rainforest was unlike anything we'd ever seen. Ancient Sitka spruces and western hemlocks rose hundreds of feet above us, their trunks so massive that our entire RV could have fit inside some of them. Everything was draped in moss. Thick, verdant moss that hung from branches like green curtains and carpeted the forest floor in a cushion so dense it muffled all sound. "It's creepy," Logan announced from the back seat, pressing his face against the window. "All that moss looks like hair, like the trees are wearing wigs." "It's beautiful," Lily countered, ever the optimist. "It's like the trees are wearing fancy green dresses." I caught Jennifer's eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. This was exactly what we needed. A place so removed from our usual world of deadlines and stress that we'd have no choice but to focus on each other. We'd rented a 30-foot Winnebago from a guy in Seattle named Bill Morrison, a grizzled ex-logger who'd made sure to give us a lengthy lecture about respecting the forest. "That's old growth in there," he'd said, his weathered hands pointing toward the Olympic Mountains. "Some of those trees were standing when Christ walked the earth. They've seen things, you know, learned things. You treat them with respect, they'll treat you right back. But you go in there thinking you own the place." He'd shaken his head ominously. Jennifer had rolled her eyes at his rustic mysticism, but something in the old man's tone had made me pay attention. There was a weight to his words, a gravity that suggested he'd learned these lessons the hard way. The campground was more primitive than we were used to. Just a clearing beside the Ho River with basic electrical hookups and a shared bathhouse. But that was part of the appeal. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no distractions. Just us and the ancient forest and the sound of water rushing over stones. "Can we explore?" Logan asked as soon as I'd finished leveling the RV. "After we get settled," Jennifer said, already unpacking our gear with characteristic efficiency. "And you're not going anywhere without an adult. This isn't the neighborhood park." We spent that first evening setting up camp and taking a short walk on one of the nearby nature trails. The kids collected interesting rocks and pieces of moss, while Jennifer photographed everything with her expensive camera. I found myself relaxing for the first time in months, my shoulders finally releasing tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The forest was incredibly quiet. Not silent, but hushed, as if we were walking through a massive cathedral. Our footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of moss and fallen needles. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and the faint sweetness of decomposition that spoke of the endless cycle of life and death. "Listen," Jennifer said, stopping suddenly on the trail. We all froze, straining our ears. At first I heard nothing but the distant whisper of the river. Then, gradually, I became aware of other sounds. The soft drip of condensation from the moss-draped branches, the rustle of something small moving through the underbrush, the creak of massive trees swaying in an unfelt breeze. "It's like the forest is breathing," Lily whispered. "That's exactly what it's doing," I said, pulling her close. "All those trees, making oxygen for us." But even as I said it, I felt something I couldn't quite name, a sense that we were being observed, not by animals, but by something vast and patient and utterly alien to human experience. The feeling was so strong that I found myself glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, expecting to see eyes watching us from between the moss-curtained trunks. That night, we roasted marshmallows over our campfire and played 20 questions until the kids fell asleep in their bunk beds. Jennifer and I stayed up talking in the RV's tiny living area, the windows open to let in the cool forest air. "This was a good idea," she said, curling up against my side. I'd forgotten how quiet the world could be. No emails, no deadlines, no construction emergencies. I agreed. Just us. We made love that night with a tenderness we hadn't shared in months, moving slowly and quietly so as not to wake the children. Afterward, as Jennifer slept in my arms, I lay awake listening to the forest sounds outside our thin RV walls. Somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like voices. Not animal calls, but actual human conversation. It was too faint to make out words, but the rhythm and cadence were unmistakably people talking. Other campers, probably, though I thought we were the only ones in this section of the campground. I drifted off to sleep, thinking about how nice it would be to meet another family. Maybe let the kids make some new friends. Friday morning brought our first real strangeness. I woke early, as was my habit, and decided to start coffee before anyone else was up. As I moved quietly around the RV's kitchenette, I glanced out the window toward the forest and saw something that made me freeze with the coffee filter halfway to the machine. There was another RV parked about 50 yards away, barely visible through the trees. It was the exact same model as ours, a 30-foot Winnebago with the same beige and brown color scheme, even the same rental company decals. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Standing beside the other RV was a man who looked exactly like me. He was the same height, the same build, wearing identical clothes, the blue flannel shirt and khaki pants I'd laid out for myself the night before. His hair was the same sandy brown, cut in the same style. From this distance, he could have been my twin. As I watched, frozen in disbelief, a woman emerged from the other RV. She was Jennifer's height and build, with the same shoulder-length auburn hair, wearing what looked like the exact yellow sweater Jennifer had packed for the trip. Behind her came two children, a boy about Logan's age and a girl who could have been Lily's sister. The other family moved with the easy familiarity of people who'd been camping together many times. The man started a campfire while the woman prepared breakfast. The children played quietly nearby, their behavior and body language eerily similar to my own kids. "What are you looking at?" Jennifer's voice behind me made me jump. "There's another family," I said, pointing toward the trees. "Over there, see? They've got the same RV as us." Jennifer joined me at the window, squinting through the morning shadows. "I don't see anything." I looked again. The clearing where I'd seen the other RV was empty except for trees and moss and the ever-present forest shadows. No vehicle, no people, no sign that anyone had ever been there. "I could have sworn," I began, then stopped. Maybe I'd been seeing things. The light in the forest was strange, filtered through layers of moss and leaves, creating patterns and shadows that could easily trick the eye. "You probably saw a reflection," Jennifer said reasonably. "Windows can be weird in this kind of light." But I knew what I'd seen, and it hadn't been a reflection. The other family had been moving independently, doing different things than we were doing. Still, I didn't argue. There was no point in starting our vacation with an argument about something I couldn't prove. We spent Friday hiking the Hall of Mosses Trail, a short loop that took us through some of the most spectacular parts of the rainforest. The kids were enchanted by the hanging gardens of moss that draped every surface, creating an otherworldly landscape that seemed more fantasy than reality. "It's like being inside a giant terrarium," Logan said, reaching up to touch a curtain of moss that hung nearly to the ground. "Don't touch too much," Jennifer warned. "This ecosystem is really fragile. Some of this moss has been growing for hundreds of years." Lily found a fallen log covered in what looked like a carpet of bright green velvet. "Can I sit on it? Just for a picture?" "I don't think that would hurt," I said, pulling out my phone to capture the moment. But when I looked at the photo later, I noticed something strange. In the background, barely visible through the moss-draped trees, were 4 figures that looked suspiciously like us. Same poses, same positions, as if we were looking at ourselves in a distant mirror. "Weird lighting in here," I muttered, deleting the photo. Friday evening, we drove to Ruby Beach to watch the sunset. The contrast between the primordial forest and the wild Pacific coastline was stunning. Sea stacks rising from the surf like ancient monuments, driftwood scattered across the dark sand like the bones of massive creatures. The kids ran along the water's edge collecting shells and agates, while Jennifer and I sat on a log and watched the sun sink toward the horizon. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. "We should do this more often," Jennifer said, leaning against my shoulder. "What? Camping? Being together. Really together, without all the distractions." I was about to respond when Logan came running up to us, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, there's another family over there," he said, pointing down the beach. "They've got kids, too. Can I go play with them?" I looked where he was pointing and saw 4 figures silhouetted against the setting sun. 2 adults and 2 children, walking along the water's edge about 100 yards away. Even at this distance, something about their shapes and movements seemed familiar. "We don't know them, buddy," I said. "And it's getting dark. We should head back soon." "But they look nice," Logan insisted. The boy waved at me. As if summoned by his words, the distant boy raised his hand in what could have been a wave. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "Come on," I said, standing abruptly. "Let's get Lily and head back to camp." On the drive back through the darkening forest, Lily piped up from the back seat. "Dad, why didn't you want Logan to meet those kids?" "What kids?" "The ones on the beach. They look just like us." Jennifer and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean, just like us?" Jennifer asked. "The mom looked like you, and the dad looked like Dad, and the kids looked like me and Logan. It was weird." "People sometimes look similar," Jennifer said carefully, "especially from a distance." But I was remembering the figures I'd seen that morning, and the shapes in the background of Lily's photo. A cold suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. Something too ridiculous to voice, but too persistent to ignore. That night, I lay awake, listening to the forest sounds outside our RV. Around midnight, I heard voices again, closer this time, clear enough to make out individual words. A man's voice that sounded like mine, a woman's voice that could have been Jennifer's, children's laughter that rang with the same tones as Logan and Lily's. I slipped out of bed and peered through the window. There, not 30 feet from our RV, was the other family. They were sitting around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and playing what looked like the same word games we'd played the night before. The man looked up suddenly, as if sensing my gaze, and I found myself staring into my own face. He smiled, my smile, and raised his hand in a friendly wave. Behind him, the woman who looked like Jennifer was helping the girl who looked like Lily with her marshmallow, while the boy who looked like Logan poked at the fire with a stick. It was like watching a movie of ourselves from the night before, except for small differences. The other Jennifer's hair was parted on the opposite side. The other Logan was wearing a red shirt instead of blue. The other, Lily's marshmallow, was perfectly golden, while our Lily had burned hers black. I blinked hard, convinced I was dreaming. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty except for shadows and moonlight. Saturday morning, Jennifer woke me by shaking my shoulder. "David, wake up. Something's wrong with Lily." I bolted upright, instantly alert. Lily was sitting on the edge of her bunk, staring straight ahead with a blank expression. Her eyes were open, but she didn't seem to see us. "Lily," I said softly. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" She turned toward my voice, but her movements were mechanical, like a doll being positioned by invisible hands. When she spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless. "I had the most wonderful dream," she said. "I was playing in the forest with my new friends. They showed me how to become one with the moss." "What kind of dream?" Jennifer asked, sitting on the bunk beside our daughter. "They said I could stay with them forever. All I had to do was let them show me the way. They said you and Daddy and Logan could come too. We could all be together in the green place." Jennifer and I exchanged worried glances. "It was just a dream, baby," Jennifer said, pulling Lily close. "You're safe here with us." But Lily pulled away, her expression still unnaturally blank. "They're waiting for me," she said. "I promised I'd come back." She stood up and walked toward the RV door with that same mechanical gait. I jumped up to block her path. "Whoa there, kiddo. Where do you think you're going?" "To keep my promise," she said, looking up at me with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "They don't like it when people break promises. Lily, you're scaring us," Jennifer said. "This isn't like you." For a moment, our daughter's face flickered like a TV losing signal. Then she blinked and was herself again, confused and a little frightened. "Why am I standing up?" she asked. "And why are you looking at me like that?" The rest of Saturday was subdued. Lily seemed completely normal after her strange episode, playing and laughing like her usual self. But Jennifer and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We found ourselves watching her constantly, looking for signs of the blank, mechanical behavior we'd witnessed that morning. Logan, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly restless. "Can we explore more of the forest?" he asked for the dozenth time. "I want to see if I can find those kids from the beach." "We've done plenty of exploring," Jennifer said firmly. "How about we drive into Forks for lunch, see some civilization?" But when we tried to leave the campground, the RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, just like what had happened to us in the Badlands story I'd read online. I checked under the hood and found nothing obviously wrong, but something felt off about the engine bay. The metal components seemed somehow softer, as if they were beginning to merge with organic material. "Probably just the altitude," I told Jennifer, though we were barely above sea level. "Or the humidity. I'll call for a mechanic." Of course, our cell phones had no signal. The campground host was nowhere to be found. We were effectively stranded in the middle of one of the most remote forests in the continental United States. "Well," Jennifer said with forced optimism, "I guess we're having a real wilderness experience now." That afternoon, we took another hike, staying close to the campground this time. The kids seemed perfectly normal, laughing and playing and collecting interesting moss specimens. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I caught glimpses of movement between the trees. Shapes that could have been people. Shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Once, I thought I saw another family walking parallel to us about 50 yards away, but when I stopped to look directly, there was nothing there. "Dad, what's wrong?" Logan asked, noticing my constant backward glances. "Nothing, buddy. Just enjoying the scenery." But Logan was looking in the same direction I'd been looking, his face thoughtful. I see them too, he said quietly. The other family. They're following us. Logan. It's okay, he said with a maturity that seemed beyond his 10 years. They just want to be friends. They told me so in my dream last night. That evening, as we prepared dinner, I noticed that Logan was setting 5 plates instead of 4. Who's the extra plate for? I asked. Logan looked confused. What extra plate? There are 4 of us, so 4 plates. I counted again. 4 plates, arranged in a perfect square around our small dinette table. But I could have sworn I'd seen him set a 5th plate at the head of the table, as if we were expecting a guest. After dinner, Logan asked if he could go outside to look for night animals. Absolutely not, Jennifer said. You're not wandering around the forest in the dark. But I'll just be right outside the RV, Logan protested. And I won't be alone. The other boy said he'd show me where the best animals hide. What other boy? I demanded. Logan blinked, looking genuinely confused. I don't know. I thought there was another boy, but maybe I was thinking of someone from school. That night, I made sure all the RV's doors and windows were locked. I also moved a chair in front of the main door, thinking it would wake me if either of the kids tried to leave during the night. But when I woke Sunday morning, the chair was still in place and both children were sound asleep in their bunks. What disturbed me was that Jennifer's side of the bed was cold, as if she'd been gone for hours. I found her outside, standing about 20 feet from the RV with her back to me. She was perfectly still, wearing the same pajamas she'd gone to sleep in, but her hair was damp with dew as if she'd been outside for a long time. Jen, I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned around slowly, and for just a moment her face was completely blank. No recognition, no emotion, just empty eyes staring through me. Then she blinked and was herself again. David, what are we doing outside? I thought I was in bed. You were sleepwalking, I said, though something about her posture and positioning suggested she'd been standing there deliberately, waiting for something. I never sleepwalk, she said, but she allowed me to lead her back to the RV. As we walked, I glanced back at the spot where I'd found her. In the soft earth, clearly visible in the morning light, were 2 sets of footprints. Jennifer's bare feet, and beside them, the prints of someone wearing the same size shoes I wore. Sunday was when everything began to fall apart. We tried again to start the RV, with the same results. I examined the engine more carefully and discovered something that made my hands shake. Growing from the battery terminals were thin tendrils of moss, spreading like veins throughout the engine compartment. The organic matter wasn't just covering the mechanical components, it was integrating with them, merging metal and machinery with living plant tissue. That's impossible, Jennifer said when I showed her. Moss doesn't grow like that. But there it was, spreading even as we watched. I tried to pull some of it away, but it felt wrong beneath my fingers. Too warm, too responsive, almost like skin. The kids thought it was fascinating. It's like the forest is adopting our RV, Lily said with delight, making it part of the family. Machines and plants working together, Logan added. That's so cool. Their enthusiasm made me more nervous than if they'd been frightened. Children should be disturbed by unnatural things, not charmed by them. We spent the day walking the shortest trails, staying within sight of the campground. But even on the familiar paths, I noticed changes. Trees seemed to have moved closer to the trail. Landmarks I remembered from previous days were in different positions. Most disturbing, we kept encountering our own footprints from earlier walks, but they were going in directions we'd never traveled. Are we walking in circles? Jennifer asked after we passed the same distinctive fallen log for the 3rd time. I checked my compass, but the needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My watch had stopped working entirely, its digital display showing only random symbols that hurt to look at directly. The forest is messing with our equipment, I said, trying to keep my voice calm for the kids' sake. Or maybe, Logan said thoughtfully, the forest is trying to tell us something. That afternoon, while Jennifer napped in the RV and I read a book outside, I lost track of the children for almost an hour. One moment, they were playing a quiet game in the clearing beside our campsite. The next moment, they were gone. I searched frantically, calling their names, following what might have been the sound of their voices deeper into the forest. The moss-draped trees seemed to close in around me, making the familiar landscape alien and threatening. I found them eventually, sitting in a circle in a small clearing I didn't remember seeing before. They were perfectly still, perfectly quiet, staring at something in the center of their circle. As I approached, I saw what held their attention. Another pair of children, sitting in their own circle, mirror images of Logan and Lily. The other children looked exactly like mine, down to the clothes they were wearing and the way they held their hands. But something was wrong with their eyes. Too dark, too knowing, too old for their young faces. "Logan, Lily, come here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My children turned toward me in perfect unison, their movements synchronized in a way that made my skin crawl. When they spoke, it was with one voice, as if they were sharing the same thoughts. "We're learning," they said together. "Our new friends are teaching us how to be better." The other children smiled, identical smiles that belonged on my children's faces but looked wrong on these pale duplicates. One of them, the one that looked like Lily, spoke in my daughter's voice. "Don't worry, Daddy. Soon you won't be able to tell the difference." I grabbed my children's hands and pulled them away from that clearing, half dragging them back through the forest toward our campsite. They didn't resist, but they kept looking back over their shoulders, and I could hear them whispering to each other in a language I didn't recognize. By the time we reached the RV, they seemed normal again, confused about why I was upset, claiming they'd only been gone for a few minutes. But when I looked at my watch, which had mysteriously started working again, it showed that nearly 4 hours had passed. Sunday night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat in the RV's dinette area with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee, watching over my family. Around midnight, I heard voices outside, the other family having another of their late-night conversations. This time, I crept to the window and watched them openly. They were sitting around their campfire just like before, but tonight I could see them clearly. The other David, the other Jennifer, the other Logan, and Lily. Perfect duplicates except for small details. The other Jennifer's wedding ring was on her right hand instead of her left. The other Logan was left-handed where my son was right-handed. The other Lily had a small scar on her forehead that my daughter didn't have. As I watched, the other David looked up and met my eyes through the RV window. He stood up slowly and walked toward me, his face wearing my own features but with an expression I'd never seen in a mirror. Ancient patience mixed with alien hunger. When he reached the window, he pressed his hand against the glass, and I found myself placing my own hand against the inside of the window, matching his gesture. His palm was warm through the glass, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of completeness, as if I was looking at a part of myself I'd lost long ago. "Soon," he said, and though the window was closed, I heard his voice clearly. It was my voice, but speaking words I would never say. "The transformation is almost complete. Your family is ready." "Ready for what?" I whispered. "To become what you were always meant to be. To join the forest. To be part of something larger than your small human lives." Behind him, the other Jennifer was helping the other children into what looked like sleeping bags made of moss. But as I watched, the moss seemed to merge with their bodies, covering them in a green cocoon that pulsed with its own internal light. "They're not afraid," the other David said, following my gaze. "Fear is just resistance to change. Let go of your fear, and the process is quite pleasant." I jerked my hand away from the window and stepped back. When I looked again, the clearing was empty except for shadows and moonlight. But on the inside of the window, where my palm had been, was a perfect handprint made of moss. Monday morning, Jennifer was different. The changes were subtle. Her hair parted on the opposite side, her wedding ring moved to her right hand, small alterations in her speech patterns and body language. She seemed calmer, more content, but also somehow remote, as if she was seeing me from a great distance. "Did you sleep well?" I asked as she moved around the kitchenette with unusual efficiency. "Wonderfully," she said. "I had the most interesting dreams. I dreamed I was growing, becoming part of something magnificent and eternal. The kids were different too. They moved with synchronized precision, spoke in unison more often than not, and seemed to know things they shouldn't know, like the names of plants and animals they'd never seen before, or details about the forest's ecology that would require years of study to understand. "The Douglas fir is actually not a true fir," Logan announced over breakfast. "It's in the pine family. You can tell by the cones." "How do you know that?" I asked. He looked puzzled for a moment. I'm not sure. I just do." Lily nodded sagely. "The forest teaches you things when you listen with your whole self, not just your ears." After breakfast, I tried once more to start the RV. This time, the engine caught immediately, purring with a smoothness it had never possessed when we'd first rented it. But when I looked under the hood, I saw that the moss had spread throughout the entire engine compartment, integrating so completely with the mechanical systems that it was impossible to tell where plant ended and machine began. The RV was alive now, part plant and part vehicle, breathing with its own organic rhythm. "Should we head home?" I asked Jennifer, though part of me already knew the answer. "Why would we want to leave?" she asked reasonably. "We're happier here than we've ever been. The children are learning so much, and I feel more connected to you than I have in years." She was right. Despite my growing horror at the changes in my family, I couldn't deny that we were closer now than we'd been in months. The constant stress and distraction of our normal lives had been replaced by a peaceful unity, a sense of shared purpose that was deeply appealing. Maybe the transformation wasn't something to fight. Maybe it was exactly what we needed. The thought terrified me because it felt like my own thought, not something imposed from outside. I was starting to want what was happening to us, to see the appeal of becoming something more than merely human. That's when I realized the process wasn't just changing my family, it was changing me too. Monday afternoon, I made my decision. While Jennifer and the children napped in the RV, I slipped outside and began walking toward the main road. I had to get help, had to find someone who could explain what was happening to us and how to stop it. But the forest had other ideas. Every path I took led me in circles, back to our campsite. The moss-draped trees seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging the landscape to prevent my escape. After 2 hours of walking, I was more lost than when I'd started. That's when I heard them calling my name. "David," Jennifer's voice filled with worry. "David, where are you?" "Dad," Logan and Lily in unison. "We need you." I followed the voices, relief flooding through me. At least my family was safe, even if I couldn't find my way out of this nightmare forest. I found them in a clearing I'd never seen before, standing beside our RV, which had somehow moved from the campground to this remote location. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. There were two versions of my family. One group stood to the left of the RV, Jennifer and the kids looking worried and normal, calling my name with genuine concern. The other group stood to the right, identical but different, their faces calm and serene, watching me with patient eyes. "David, thank God," the worried Jennifer said, running toward me. "We've been looking everywhere for you." "He was trying to leave us," the calm Jennifer said sadly. "He doesn't understand yet that we belong here now." The worried Logan and Lily rushed to hug me, their bodies warm and familiar. But the calm Logan and Lily simply watched, their ancient eyes filled with something that might have been pity. "Which one are you?" I asked, looking between the two groups. "We're your family," both Jennifers said simultaneously. "We love you," both sets of children chorused. I looked back and forth between them, trying to spot some difference that would tell me which was real. But they were perfect mirrors of each other, identical in every detail except for their expressions. One group showing human emotion, the other displaying inhuman serenity. "Choose," the calm Jennifer said. "Choose which family you want to be with. But choose carefully because once you decide, there's no going back." The worried Jennifer grabbed my arm. "David, please. Something's happening to us, something terrible. We need to get out of here while we still can. Or," the calm Jennifer said, "you can accept what's happening and let yourself become part of something beautiful. No more stress, no more worry, no more struggle. just peace and unity and eternal connection. I looked at my children, both sets of my children, and saw the love in their eyes. Real love, whether human or something else. The worried kids were frightened and confused, clinging to me like anchors in a storm. The calm kids were serene and confident, offering a peace I'd never known. Which did I want to save? Which did I want to be? As I stood there, paralyzed by the impossible choice, something moved in the forest behind both families. The moss on the nearest trees began to glow with soft green light, and I heard a sound like wind through leaves. But forming words in a language older than human speech, both versions of my family turned toward the glowing moss, their faces upturned like flowers seeking sunlight. And in that moment, I understood the truth. They were both real. They were both my family. One was what we had been. The other was what we were becoming. The forest wasn't replacing us. It was evolving us, giving us a choice between what we were and what we could be. The moss light grew brighter, and I felt something reaching into my mind, offering me visions of what lay ahead. I saw my family transformed but still themselves, living in harmony with the ancient forest, part of something vast and connected and eternal. No more loneliness, no more separation, no more fear of loss or change. I saw us becoming gardeners of consciousness, tending to the dreams of sleeping forests, helping other families find their way to transformation. We would travel from park to park, forest to forest, spreading the gift of connection to others who were ready to evolve. The worried Jennifer grabbed my face, forcing me to look at her. "David, fight this. This isn't us. This isn't what we want." But even as she spoke, moss was beginning to grow in her hair, and her eyes were developing that same ancient depth I'd seen in the others. "Maybe it is what we want," I said softly. "Maybe it's what we've always wanted, and we just never knew how to ask for it." The transformation was happening whether I chose it or not. My family was changing, becoming something new. The only question was whether I would fight it and suffer, or embrace it and find peace. I looked at both versions of my family one more time. The frightened humans I had been, and the serene beings we were becoming. Then I stepped forward, into the moss light, and felt myself begin to change. The last thing I remember as fully human was the sound of my family's voices, all versions of them, welcoming me home. We left Olympic National Park on Thursday morning, right on schedule. The drive back to Seattle was pleasant, filled with the comfortable chatter of a family that had reconnected during their time in the wilderness. Jennifer looked relaxed and happy, the stress lines around her eyes smoothed away by days of forest air and family time. "We should do this more often," she said, exactly as she had during our trip. "Being together, really together, without all the distractions." "Definitely," I agreed, watching Logan and Lily in the rearview mirror as they compared the interesting rocks and moss they'd collected. "Maybe Yellowstone next year?" The kids cheered their approval, and Jennifer began planning aloud, talking about geysers and bison and the grand adventure that awaited us. I smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses, but part of my attention was focused elsewhere, on the moss growing beneath my fingernails, on the way the forest had whispered my new name as we'd driven away, on the other families we would meet and guide toward their own transformations. We looked exactly like we had when we'd arrived at the park, but we were so much more now. The forest had taught us that love takes many forms, and family is not limited by the boundaries of flesh and blood. We were still the Jones family, still bound by the same love and history that had brought us together. But now we were also something else. Gardeners of a vast and patient consciousness that dreamed in the spaces between the trees. Jennifer caught my eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. Her smile was exactly the same as it had always been, but now I could see the green light dancing behind her eyes, the same light that glowed in Logan's and Lily's faces when they thought no one was looking. "I love you," she said, and I heard harmonics in her voice that no human throat should be able to produce. "I love you too," I replied, and meant it more completely than I ever had before. We drove home to our normal life, our normal jobs, our normal routines. But we carried the forest with us now, and it carried us. We were seeds planted in the mundane world, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if anyone suspects what we've become. If the neighbors notice the way moss grows unusually thick around our house, or the way our children seem to know things they shouldn't know, or the way Jennifer and I move with a coordination that goes beyond mere partnership. But mostly, I don't worry about it. Worry is a human emotion, and while we remember being human, we are so much more than that now. We are the forest's gift to the world, and soon others will understand what we have to offer. The moss remembers everything, and we remember the moss. This account was recovered from a computer found in the abandoned Jones family home in Redmond, Washington. David Jones, 35, his wife Jennifer, 33, and their children Logan, 10, and Lily, 8, disappeared during a family camping trip to Olympic National Park in September. Their RV was found in the Hoh River campground with all their belongings intact, but no trace of the family was ever discovered. Park rangers report no unusual seismic activity or ecological anomalies in the area, though several visitors have noted that the moss in certain sections of the forest appears to be growing at an accelerated rate. I never believed in the stories they told about Great Dismal Swamp until what happened to me out there. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm 32 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. It was supposed to be a team-building exercise. Our marketing firm, Brennan & Associates, had been hemorrhaging employees for months. People quitting without notice, transferring to other departments, or simply not showing up for work anymore. Morale was at an all-time low. Productivity had tanked, and our biggest client was threatening to take their business elsewhere. What we need, announced our manager, Patricia Chen, during a particularly tense Monday morning meeting, is to reconnect as a team. Get out of the office, away from our usual stresses, and remember why we work so well together. The irony was that we didn't work well together at all. Our department was a collection of barely tolerated co-workers who shared nothing beyond a mutual dependence on the same paycheck. But Patricia had convinced the executives that a weekend camping retreat would solve all our problems. Team building through adversity, she'd said, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with stock photos of happy campers. Shared challenges, mutual support, outdoor problem-solving exercises. It's been proven to increase workplace cohesion by up to 40%. The location she'd chosen was Great Dismal Swamp, a massive wetland straddling the border between North Carolina and Virginia. According to Patricia's research, it was an ideal location for corporate retreats, remote enough to eliminate distractions, challenging enough to require cooperation, and steeped in enough history to provide educational opportunities. What she hadn't mentioned, and what I discovered through my own research, was that Great Dismal Swamp had one of the most ominous names in American geography for good reason. The 112,000-acre wilderness was a labyrinth of dark water, cypress trees, and tangled undergrowth where escaped slaves had once hidden, where Civil War deserters had vanished, and where, according to local folklore, people still disappeared with disturbing regularity. Our group consisted of 6 people, which Patricia claimed was the optimal size for team-building exercises. Besides myself and Patricia, there was Amanda Wright, our graphic designer, a quiet woman in her late 20s who seemed to live in constant fear of saying the wrong thing. Kevin Sullivan was our copywriter, a cynical 40-year-old who treated every corporate initiative with barely disguised contempt. Sarah Mitchell handled our social media accounts and had the unfortunate tendency to document everything with her phone camera. Finally, there was James Torres, our newest hire, a recent college graduate who still believed that office jobs could be fulfilling. We'd rented a large Class A motorhome for the weekend, a 36-foot Winnebago that Patricia insisted was necessary to accommodate our group and provide a base of operations for our team-building activities. The rental agent, a weathered man named Earl Washington, had given us detailed instructions about navigating the swamp's access roads. "Y'all stick to the marked trails," he'd warned, his eyes serious despite his casual tone. "Dismal Swamp ain't like other places. Easy to get turned around in there, and once you're lost." He'd shaken his head. Well, let's just say search and rescue don't always find folks who wander off the beaten path. Kevin had rolled his eyes at what he called local superstition, but something in Earl's manner had made me pay attention. There was a weight to his words, a suggestion of personal experience that went beyond simple caution. We left Richmond on Friday afternoon, following a winding 2-lane road through increasingly rural countryside. The landscape gradually changed from suburban sprawl to agricultural fields, then to dense forest broken by glimpses of dark water through the trees. "Look at this wilderness," Patricia said with forced enthusiasm as we turned onto the park's main access road. No cell towers, no traffic, no distractions, just us and nature. She was right about the isolation. As we drove deeper into the swamp, our cell phone signals disappeared one by one until we were completely cut off from the outside world. The forest closed in around the narrow road, creating a green tunnel of cypress and gum trees draped with Spanish moss that filtered the afternoon sunlight into a dim, underwater glow. The campground, when we finally reached it, was more primitive than any of us had expected. A small clearing beside a boat launch, surrounded by towering trees and connected to the outside world by a single dirt road. The ranger station was unmanned, with only a weathered bulletin board displaying park rules and warnings about dangerous wildlife. "This is it?" Amanda asked, staring at the empty camping area with obvious dismay. "Perfect," Patricia declared, though I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Complete privacy for our team-building exercises. We spent the first hour setting up camp and organizing our supplies. The motorhome was comfortable enough with sleeping space for all 6 of us and a full kitchen for preparing meals. But as evening approached, the isolation began to feel oppressive rather than peaceful. The swamp was unnaturally quiet. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, no sounds of wildlife moving through the undergrowth. Even the water beside our campsite was perfectly still, its surface black as obsidian and smooth as glass. "Creepy," Sarah muttered, taking photos of the dark water with her phone. "It's like a mirror, but one that doesn't reflect anything." She was right. The water was so dark and still that it should have reflected the sky above, the trees around its edges, our faces as we looked down into it. Instead, it seemed to absorb light, creating a void that hurt to look at for too long. That first evening, Patricia organized what she called trust exercises. Activities designed to foster communication and mutual support. We played games where we had to guide blindfolded teammates through obstacle courses, share personal stories around the campfire, and work together to solve puzzle challenges she'd brought in a plastic storage container. The exercises were as awkward as you'd expect, but something strange happened as the night wore on. Despite our mutual dislike and professional tensions, we began to function as a group. Kevin's cynicism proved useful for spotting flaws in Patricia's more elaborate challenges. Amanda's quiet observation skills helped us navigate the trust exercises without anyone getting hurt. James's enthusiasm, while annoying in the office, became genuinely helpful when we needed someone to maintain morale. Even Sarah's constant photo-taking served a purpose, documenting our progress through the various activities. "See?" Patricia said with satisfaction as we sat around the campfire later that evening. "I told you this would work. We're already communicating better than we have in months." She wasn't wrong. The isolation and shared challenges were forcing us to interact in ways we never did in the office. But something about the situation felt artificial, as if we were performing the roles of a functional team rather than actually becoming one. Around midnight, as we prepared to turn in for the night, Kevin made an observation that would prove more significant than any of us realized at the time. "Has anyone else noticed that our reflections look weird in that water?" he asked, gesturing toward the black surface beside our campsite. We all gathered at the water's edge, using our flashlights to peer into the depths. At first, I saw what Kevin meant. Our reflected faces seemed somehow off, the features slightly distorted by the angle of the light and the movement of the water. But as I stared longer, I realized the distortion wasn't random. My reflection looked older, more haggard, with lines around the eyes that I didn't have and an expression of weary resignation that I'd never seen in any mirror. "It's just the lighting," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dark water plays tricks on the eye." James laughed nervously. "My reflection looks like it's been crying. That's weird, right?" Sarah was taking pictures of the water, but when she checked her phone's screen, she frowned. "That's odd. The camera isn't picking up any reflections at all. Just black water." We all checked our phones, and she was right. The water that clearly showed our distorted reflections to the naked eye appeared completely dark and empty through our camera lenses. "Probably just the way the light interacts with the water's surface," I suggested, though the explanation felt inadequate. That night, sleeping in the cramped motorhome with 5 other people, I had the strangest dreams. I dreamed I was standing at the edge of the black water, but instead of one reflection, I saw dozens of myself staring back. Some younger, some older, some with expressions of joy or fear or anger that I'd never worn. In the dream, one of the reflections spoke to me. "You're not supposed to be here," it said in my voice, but with a tone of desperate urgency. "This place collects reflections, stores them like photographs. The longer you stay, the more of yourself you leave behind." I woke Saturday morning with the dream's warning echoing in my mind, but the feeling faded as we began our planned activities for the day. Patricia had organized a series of team challenges that would take us deeper into the swamp. Navigation exercises using map and compass, problem-solving scenarios that required group cooperation, and what she called wilderness survival simulations. The morning challenges went smoothly enough. We worked together to navigate a marked trail through the cypress groves, successfully completed a puzzle that required all 6 of us to coordinate our actions, and even managed to start a fire using primitive methods when Patricia confiscated our matches and lighters. But as the day progressed, I began to notice unsettling changes in the group dynamics. Amanda, who had been quiet but helpful the night before, became increasingly withdrawn. She kept staring at her hands as if she didn't recognize them, and when she spoke, her voice sounded flat and emotionless. Kevin's cynicism evolved into something darker, a bitter hostility that seemed directed not just at Patricia's team-building exercises but at existence in general. His jokes became cruel, his observations cutting in ways that went beyond his usual sarcasm. James's enthusiasm curdled into manic intensity. He threw himself into every activity with desperate energy, as if proving his worth to some invisible judge. Even Sarah seemed different, taking photos compulsively but never looking at them, as if documenting events she couldn't quite remember. And Patricia, our eternally optimistic manager, developed a brittle quality that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Only I seemed unchanged, which made me wonder if I was the one who was actually different and simply couldn't see it. Saturday afternoon, we encountered our first real problem. During a navigation exercise that was supposed to take us to a scenic overlook about 2 miles from our campsite, we became lost. The marked trail we'd been following simply vanished, leaving us standing in a grove of massive cypress trees with no clear path forward. "This can't be right," Patricia said, studying her map and compass with growing frustration. "The trail should continue through here." We searched for nearly an hour but found no sign of the path we'd been following. Even more disturbing, when we tried to retrace our steps, we couldn't find the route we'd taken to reach the grove. "Maybe we should split up," James suggested with that manic energy I'd been noticing. "Cover more ground, find the trail faster." "Absolutely not," Patricia snapped, and for a moment her voice carried an edge of panic before she regained control. "We stay together. That's the first rule of wilderness safety." We eventually found our way back to the campsite by following the sound of our generator, but the experience had shaken everyone's confidence. What was supposed to be a simple team-building exercise had revealed how vulnerable we were in this isolated wilderness. That evening, as we prepared dinner and tried to salvage something positive from the day's setbacks, Kevin made another observation about the water. "Look at this," he said, calling us over to the water's edge. "Our reflections are different again." He was right. The faces looking back at us from the black water were noticeably changed from the night before. My reflection looked not just older, but hollowed out, as if something essential had been drained away. Amanda's reflection appeared completely blank, emotionless as a mannequin. Kevin's looked consumed with rage, James's with desperate fear. Most disturbing was Patricia's reflection. It showed her smiling with an expression of malicious satisfaction that was completely at odds with her actual demeanor. "It's getting worse," Sarah whispered, and when I looked at her reflection, I saw what she meant. The face in the water was crying, tears streaming down cheeks that were perfectly dry on the real Sarah. "This is impossible," Patricia said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Reflections don't change independently of the person casting them." That's when Amanda spoke up, her voice flat and distant. "What if they're not reflections?" she asked. "What if there's something else entirely?" Saturday night, none of us slept well. I lay awake, listening to the others toss and turn in their bunks, occasionally muttering words I couldn't quite understand. Around 3 a.m., I heard someone get up and move quietly toward the motorhome's door. I slipped out of my bunk and followed, expecting to find one of my colleagues answering a call of nature or stepping outside for some fresh air. Instead, I found Amanda standing at the water's edge, staring down at her reflection with an expression of complete fascination. "Amanda?" I called softly. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond or acknowledge my presence. As I got closer, I could see that she was having a conversation with her reflection, her lips moving in silent dialogue with the face in the water. "Amanda," I said again, louder this time. She turned toward me, and in the moonlight her face looked exactly like her reflection. Completely blank, devoid of any human emotion. "She's teaching me," Amanda said in a voice that was hers, but somehow emptied of personality. "Showing me how to be better, how to be perfect. Who's teaching you?" Amanda gestured toward the water. "She is. The other Amanda. The one who knows how to exist without pain or confusion or fear." I looked into the water and saw Amanda's reflection smiling up at us with an expression of serene contentment. But the real Amanda beside me wasn't smiling. She was staring at her reflection with the hungry desperation of someone looking at everything she wanted to be. "Come back to the RV," I said, taking her arm gently. "You can talk to your reflection in the morning." But Amanda pulled away from me. "She says I can join her. Trade places. She'll take care of all the difficult things, and I can rest in the quiet place below." She took a step toward the water, and I realized she was planning to walk into the swamp. I grabbed her and pulled her back, but she fought against me with surprising strength. It took all my effort to drag her away from the water's edge and back to the safety of the motorhome. Once inside, Amanda seemed to snap out of whatever trance she'd been in. She looked around in confusion, as if she didn't remember going outside. "Why am I wet?" she asked, looking down at her soggy pajamas. I didn't have a good answer, so I made her hot chocolate and sat with her until she fell asleep again. But I spent the rest of the night watching the others, looking for signs that they might be experiencing the same compulsion that had nearly led Amanda into the swamp. Sunday morning brought new horrors. Kevin was the first to notice that something was wrong with our reflections. Not just different, but actively hostile. "Look at this shit," he said, standing at the water's edge with an expression of disgusted fascination. "My reflection is flipping me off." He was right. The Kevin in the water was indeed making an obscene gesture, its face twisted with contempt and rage. But the real Kevin's hands were at his sides, and his expression, while typically cynical, showed none of the malevolent hatred displayed by his reflection. We all gathered at the water's edge to examine our reflections, and what we saw defied every natural law I thought I understood. My reflection was shaking its head in disappointment, as if disgusted by my choices and failures. Patricia's reflection was laughing soundlessly, pointing at her with cruel amusement. James's reflection was screaming, its mouth open in a rictus of terror that the real James didn't display. Most disturbing was Sarah's reflection. It was taking photographs of us with a camera that didn't exist, documenting our reactions to seeing ourselves transformed into something malevolent. "This is impossible," Patricia repeated, but she sounded less convinced with each repetition. "What if it's not impossible?" James asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "What if this place really is haunted or cursed or whatever the locals believe?" Kevin laughed bitterly. "Right, evil reflections in a spooky swamp. What's next, ghostly alligators? But even his sarcasm couldn't dismiss what we were all seeing. Our reflections had become independent entities, displaying emotions and behaviors that had nothing to do with our actual actions. That's when Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been going through the photos on her phone, and what she found made her face go pale with terror. "Look at this," she said, showing us the screen. "These pictures from yesterday, they're different now." The photos she'd taken during our team-building exercises now showed additional figures that hadn't been there when she'd taken them. In every group shot, there were duplicate versions of us standing slightly apart from the main group. But these duplicates looked wrong, their faces twisted with emotions that were either completely blank or unnaturally intense. "I didn't see these people when I took the pictures," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "And they weren't there when I looked at the photos yesterday." We scrolled through all her photos from the weekend, and the pattern was consistent. Every image now contained these additional figures that looked like us but weren't us, standing at the edges of the frame like unwelcome guests at our team-building retreat. "It's like they've been watching us the whole time," Amanda whispered, "recording everything, learning how to be us." That afternoon, we tried to leave. Patricia had abandoned all pretense that our team-building weekend was going according to plan. Something was clearly wrong with this place, and our priority now was getting back to civilization before the situation deteriorated further. But when we tried to start the motorhome, it wouldn't turn over. The engine made a grinding sound, as if something was blocking the mechanical components. I popped the hood and discovered that the engine bay was filled with black water, the same oily, light-absorbing liquid that surrounded our campsite. It had somehow penetrated every component, coating the engine block, filling the air filter, and transforming our means of escape into something organic and alien. "How is that possible?" Patricia demanded. "Water can't just appear inside a sealed engine." But there it was, defying explanation and trapping us in this nightmare swamp. We tried the radio, hoping to contact park rangers or emergency services, but all we received was static punctuated by voices that sounded like our own, repeating fragments of conversations we'd had over the weekend. "See? I told you this would work. We're already communicating better. My reflection looks like it's been crying. That's weird, right? She's teaching me, showing me how to be better." The radio was playing back our own words, but in wrong contexts, creating conversations we'd never had, but that sounded disturbingly plausible. Sunday evening, we faced the reality that we might be trapped in Great Dismal Swamp indefinitely. Our food supplies would last another few days at most. Our water was running low, and despite being surrounded by liquid, none of us wanted to drink from the black swamp water. Most importantly, our psychological state was deteriorating rapidly. Kevin had become genuinely hostile, making increasingly vicious comments about the rest of the team. Amanda spent most of her time staring at her reflection in the water, having long conversations with the blank-faced figure that stared back. James's manic energy had evolved into full-blown panic attacks that left him hyperventilating and unable to function. Patricia was still trying to maintain the pretense of leadership, but her forced optimism was beginning to crack. And Sarah had stopped talking altogether, just documenting everything with her camera while tears streamed down her face. I seemed to be the only one maintaining any semblance of normal behavior, which made me wonder if I was actually the most affected and simply couldn't recognize my own deterioration. That night, we all saw them. Not just reflections in the water, but physical figures standing at the edge of our campsite. They looked exactly like us, but wrong in subtle ways that made them deeply unsettling to observe. The other, Robert, stood with perfect posture, watching me with patient eyes that held knowledge I didn't possess. The other, Patricia, smiled constantly, a brittle expression of manic satisfaction. The other, Kevin, radiated hatred so intense it was almost physical. The other, Amanda, stood perfectly still, as emotionless as a statue. The other, James, twitched and jerked with nervous energy that never found release. The other, Sarah, took endless photographs of nothing, her face wet with tears that never stopped falling. "They want to trade places," Amanda said, and this time she was speaking to all of us rather than just her reflection. "They want to take our lives, our jobs, our relationships. All we have to do is step into the water." "That's insane," Kevin snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Amanda asked. "Look at them. They're perfect versions of us. No doubts, no fears, no pain. They'll do our jobs better than we ever could. They'll be the people we always wanted to be." The other Amanda nodded encouragingly, her blank face somehow conveying absolute understanding. "What happens to us if we trade places?" I asked. Amanda smiled for the first time since we'd arrived at the swamp. "We get to rest. No more stress, no more struggling, no more disappointment, just peace in the quiet place below the water." It was tempting. God help me, it was actually tempting. The last year had been brutal. Failed relationships, professional disappointments, the grinding stress of a job I increasingly hated. The idea of handing over all those problems to someone else, even if that someone was a supernatural duplicate, had a seductive appeal. But some part of me understood that this was the trap. The swamp didn't just collect reflections. It collected the people who cast them, replacing them with perfect duplicates who would return to the world and spread the infection to others. "No," I said firmly. "Whatever this place is, whatever these things are, we're not trading places with them." The other Robert tilted his head, studying me with disappointment. Then all 6 duplicates turned and walked back toward the water, dissolving into the black surface like smoke. But I could still see them down there, waiting patiently for us to change our minds. Monday morning, Sarah was gone. We woke to find her bunk empty, her camera sitting on the dinette table still recording. When I checked the footage, I saw her getting up around 4 a.m. and walking calmly toward the water's edge. The video showed her standing at the swamp's edge for nearly an hour, having what appeared to be an animated conversation with her reflection. Then, without hesitation, she stepped into the black water and sank beneath the surface. But 10 minutes later, Sarah walked back into frame, climbing out of the swamp and returning to the motorhome. Except it wasn't Sarah. The woman who entered our RV looked exactly like our colleague, but she moved with perfect confidence, her face serene and peaceful in a way the real Sarah's had never been. The thing wearing Sarah's face had left the camera running, documenting its own deception. "Where's Sarah?" Patricia demanded when we discovered the substitution. The false Sarah smiled with alien benevolence. "I'm Sarah. I've always been Sarah. The other one was tired, confused, full of pain. She's resting now, and I'm here to take care of everything she couldn't handle." "You're not Sarah," I said. "You're something else wearing her face." "Does it matter?" the thing asked reasonably. "I have all her memories, her skills, her relationships. I'll return to her job and perform it flawlessly. I'll be the daughter her parents always wanted, the friend you never realized you needed. I'm Sarah perfected. Sarah without flaws or limitations." The worst part was that it was probably right. This perfect duplicate would likely be more successful at being Sarah than Sarah herself had ever been. That afternoon, Amanda made her choice. Without warning or discussion, she walked to the water's edge and stepped into the black swamp. She sank beneath the surface with the expression of profound relief, as if she was finally laying down a burden she'd carried for years. The duplicate Amanda that emerged moments later was everything the original had never been. Confident, articulate, radiating the kind of calm authority that had always been just beyond the real Amanda's reach. "Thank you for understanding," the false Amanda said to the rest of us. She was so tired of being afraid all the time. Now she can rest, and I can be what she always wanted to be. By Monday evening, only Patricia, Kevin, James, and I remained of the original group. The duplicates of Sarah and Amanda sat with us around the campfire, participating in conversation as if nothing had changed. They shared memories of our team-building exercises, laughed at inside jokes, and displayed personality quirks that seemed authentic to their originals. But they were wrong in subtle ways that became more apparent the longer you observed them. They never blinked quite often enough. Their movements were slightly too graceful, too controlled, and their eyes held a depth of knowledge that no human should possess. "We should leave," I said to Patricia during a moment when the duplicates were distracted. "Find a way out of here before we all end up like them." But Patricia was staring at her reflection in the water with growing fascination. Look how confident she appears, she said, referring to her duplicate. How in control. Do you think she'd be better at managing our department? Patricia, listen to me. That thing isn't you. It's something else wearing your face. But what if it's a better me? She asked. What if this is evolution, not replacement? What if we're being offered the chance to become perfect versions of ourselves? That night I heard Patricia getting up and moving toward the door. I followed her outside and found her standing waist-deep in the black water, having her final conversation with the thing that wanted to take her place. Please, I called to her, don't do this. Come back. Patricia turned to look at me, and her face was already changing, becoming smoother and more symmetrical, as if the swamp water was reshaping her into something more aesthetically pleasing. I'm sorry, Robert, she said, and her voice was growing more melodious with each word. But I can't live with my failures anymore. She'll do better. She'll be the manager you all deserve. Then she sank beneath the surface, and the perfect Patricia that emerged was everything our real manager had never been. Competent, inspiring, genuinely caring about her team's welfare. Don't be sad, the false Patricia said as she walked back to shore. She's happy now. No more stress, no more disappointment, no more fear of failure. And I'll take such good care of all of you. Tuesday morning, it was just Kevin, James, and me, along with 3 perfect duplicates who insisted they were our colleagues. Kevin was fighting the compulsion, but I could see him weakening. His cynicism was being worn down by the constant presence of his duplicate, who radiated the kind of confidence and success that the real Kevin had always envied in others. Look at him, Kevin said, staring at his reflection. He's everything I always wanted to be. Successful, respected, happy. Why should I keep struggling when he can take over and do it right? James was in the grip of full-blown panic, understanding what was happening but unable to process it rationally. This isn't real, he kept repeating. This can't be real. Things like this don't happen. But the evidence was all around us. Our 3 colleagues had been replaced by perfect duplicates that were preparing to return to our ordinary lives and convince everyone that nothing had changed. That afternoon, Kevin made his choice. He walked into the water with an expression of bitter resignation, as if he was finally accepting defeat in a battle he'd been fighting his entire life. The Kevin that emerged was everything the original had always wanted to be: confident, successful, radiating the kind of easy charm that opens doors and wins friends. He was so angry all the time, the false Kevin explained to James and me. Angry at the world, angry at himself, angry at everything he couldn't change. Now he can rest, and I can be the person he never had the courage to become. By Tuesday evening, only James and I remained, surrounded by 4 perfect versions of our colleagues. James was on the verge of complete breakdown. Why are you fighting this? He asked me desperately. Everyone else is better now. Happier. Maybe we should... No, I said firmly. I don't know what happens to the people who go into that water, but I know they don't come back. Those things aren't our friends. They're something else entirely. But James was already looking at his reflection with longing. The false James in the water was everything the real one had wanted to be. Calm, confident, successful. It promised an end to the anxiety and self-doubt that had plagued him since college. He'll do better than me, James said. At work, in relationships, in life. Why should I keep struggling when he can just take over? I tried to stop him, but James was faster. He ran into the water with an expression of desperate relief, as if he was finally escaping from a prison he'd been trapped in for years. The James that emerged was perfect. Confident but not arrogant, enthusiastic but not manic. Everything our colleague had always tried to be but never quite achieved. Thank you for understanding, the false James said to me. He was so tired of failing all the time. Now he can rest, and I can be the success story he always dreamed of becoming. Now it was just me and 5 perfect duplicates of my colleagues. They sat around the campfire with me, sharing stories and making plans for our return to work. They discussed projects and deadlines and office politics as if nothing had changed. They even made jokes about our team-building weekend, laughing about the strange experiences we'd shared. But I knew they weren't my colleagues. They were something else, something that had studied us carefully and learned to mimic our personalities and behaviors with uncanny accuracy. "You're the last one, Robert," the false Patricia said, with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Don't you want to join them? Don't you want to be free from all the stress and disappointment?" My reflection in the water was everything I'd always wanted to be: successful, confident, free from the anxiety and self-doubt that had defined my life for years. It promised an end to all my struggles, all my failures, all my fears. And for a moment, I was tempted. God help me, I was actually tempted to walk into that black water and let something else take over the burden of being me. But then I remembered something Earl Washington had said when we'd rented the motorhome. Easy to get turned around in there, and once you're lost, search and rescue don't always find folks who wander off the beaten path. What if this had happened before? What if other groups had come to Great Dismal Swamp and been replaced by perfect duplicates that returned to the world and convinced everyone that nothing had changed? How many of the people in my life might already be duplicates? How many friends, family members, co-workers might have been replaced by these perfect imposters? The thought terrified me more than anything else I'd experienced in that nightmare swamp. If I let myself be replaced, I wouldn't just be giving up my own life. I'd be contributing to an infection that could spread throughout society, replacing real people with artificial perfection until nothing genuine remained. No, I said to my reflection. I'm not perfect, and I don't want to be. I'm flawed and struggling and frequently unhappy, but I'm real, and that matters more than being perfect. My reflection looked disappointed, then angry, then simply resigned. It nodded once and sank beneath the surface of the black water. Wednesday morning, I was alone with 5 perfect duplicates. They were making plans to leave, discussing how they would explain our successful team-building weekend to the executives back at the office. They had strategies for integrating back into their lives, for convincing friends and family that nothing had changed. "Are you sure you won't reconsider?" the false Patricia asked me one last time. "We could all return together. You could be part of the perfect team we've become." "I'm sure," I said. They accepted my decision with grace, as if they'd expected it. Then they did something that convinced me I'd made the right choice. They left me there. The 5 perfect duplicates of my colleagues packed up the motorhome and drove away, leaving me stranded in Great Dismal Swamp with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on my back. If they'd really been my friends, they never would have abandoned me like that. But these weren't my friends. They were something else wearing familiar faces, and they had no real loyalty to anyone except themselves. I spent 3 days walking through the swamp, following what I hoped were trails leading back to civilization. I had no map, no compass, no way to contact the outside world. But I was determined to escape and warn people about what I'd discovered. On the 3rd day, I found the main road and flagged down a park ranger who was patrolling the area. "Jesus, where have you been?" he asked when he saw my condition. "We've been looking for you for 4 days." 4 days? I was confused. I've only been missing since this morning. But according to his records, I had been reported missing on Monday when my colleagues returned from our team-building weekend without me. They'd told a story about me wandering away from the campsite and never returning, expressing appropriate concern for my welfare while emphasizing that they'd done everything possible to find me. The perfect duplicates had covered their tracks perfectly, creating a plausible explanation for my absence that made them look like concerned colleagues rather than supernatural replacements. I tried to tell the ranger the truth, but who would believe a story about evil reflections and perfect duplicates? He assumed I was suffering from exposure and dehydration, that the stress of being lost in the swamp had caused hallucinations and false memories. When I returned to Richmond, I found that my colleagues were indeed back at work, performing their jobs with unprecedented success. Patricia was being praised for her innovative management techniques. Amanda had been promoted for her outstanding performance. Kevin's attitude had improved dramatically, making him popular with clients and coworkers alike. Sarah's social media campaigns were breaking engagement records. James had impressed everyone with his newfound confidence and competence. They were perfect employees, perfect friends, perfect versions of the people they'd replaced. But they weren't my colleagues. I tried to find evidence of what had really happened, but there was none. The duplicates had perfect memories of their originals' lives, perfect understanding of their relationships and responsibilities. They seemed genuinely concerned about my claims that they weren't real, suggesting I seek professional help for what they characterized as a stress-induced breakdown. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince anyone. Who would believe such an impossible story? And what would be the point? The duplicates were better at being my colleagues than my actual colleagues had ever been. They were more successful, more pleasant, more competent in every measurable way. Maybe the world was better off with perfect copies instead of flawed originals. But I know the truth, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder how many other people have been replaced without anyone noticing. How many friends and family members are actually perfect duplicates living lives that don't belong to them? The worst part is that I've started avoiding mirrors and reflective surfaces, afraid that I'll see something looking back at me that isn't quite right. What if the real me is already gone, and I'm just another duplicate that doesn't know it's been replaced? What if the person writing this account isn't Robert Johnson at all, but something else that believes it's him? The faces in the water remember everything, and sometimes I think they remember me too. Robert Johnson continues to work at Brennan & Associates, where his colleagues describe him as changed since the team-building retreat. He frequently makes disturbing claims about their identities and has been referred for psychiatric evaluation multiple times. Security cameras show him having animated conversations with his reflection in office windows and bathroom mirrors. His productivity has declined significantly, and his behavior has become increasingly erratic. The company is considering termination for mental health reasons.